Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Emily Foster. I'm 31 years old, and this happened in October 2024. Deep in the woods of Zaleski State Forest in Ohio. I've told myself over and over again that writing it all down might make sense of things, or at least keep me sane. Yet, every time I revisit that weekend, I feel the forest reaching for me again, tugging at the edges of my thoughts. I didn't go to Zaleski for fun. I was trying to run from my grief. My younger brother, Sam, had taken his own life 2 months earlier. I worked as an emergency room nurse back in Columbus, and you'd think I would know all about trauma. But when it's personal, there's no real way to compartmentalize it. No technique to calm that constant roar in your chest. All the nightmares, all the guilt, it just flooded me. A colleague suggested I take some leave, get away from the constant churn of the hospital. I was reluctant. Work was the only thing that kept me from dwelling on the details of Sam's death. But I was exhausted, inside and out. So I went on a 4-day solo camping retreat, although solo might be an exaggeration since I brought my dog, Ranger, with me. Ranger is a big black lab mix, about 5 years old, with a goofy streak that can usually dissolve any tension in a room. Though I'd never done anything as intense as multi-night backcountry camping, I felt safer with him around. If I got lost, or something happened, I had at least one companion who loved me unconditionally. On the way, I remember driving down those narrow, winding roads in Vinton County, passing small towns that looked half abandoned, places time forgot. Old barns leaning at precarious angles, rusted mailboxes, fields of overgrown weeds. Finally, I pulled onto the gravel lot near the Hope Furnace ruins in Zaleski State Forest. The furnace was a hulking reminder of Ohio's iron mining days, a squat brick structure that looked like a pyramid with the top sheared off. I parked, put on my backpack, loaded Ranger with his doggy saddlebags, and set off into the green hush of the forest. I'd done my research. Zaleski offered primitive campsites, and I'd chosen one far from the main trails, near a creek. It was mid-October, the leaves in full metamorphosis, scattering gold and red across the ground. There was a chill in the air that signaled the approach of winter. Despite the brightness of the afternoon sun, I couldn't shake the impression that the forest was too silent. Sure, I heard some distant birds, the wind in the treetops, but everything else felt blank, like the wilderness was holding its breath. I kept glancing down at the map I'd printed, a PDF from the state's website with my route highlighted. I wanted to be sure I made it to my planned campsite before dark. Occasionally, my phone rang out with a text or social media notification, and I scolded myself for not turning it off. This was meant to be a retreat. Ranger was thrilled, sniffing every tree trunk and patch of leaves, bounding a few steps ahead and then waiting for me. We trudged on, passing a ridge with moss-covered boulders, crossing a narrow footbridge over a stream. Eventually, we found the site I wanted, a slight clearing beneath a towering oak that must have witnessed centuries of storms. The ground was damp with old leaf litter, but it was flat enough for my small 2-person tent. Setting up camp took me about an hour. I pitched the tent, arranged my sleeping bag and pad, then set up a small ring of stones for the fire. Before I even realized how much time had passed, dusk settled in, painting the sky with pastel stripes. The shadows in the forest stretched long and thin, merging into a violet gloom. That was the first time I heard it. A strange whispering that didn't come from any single place. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe distant hikers. But the hush that followed made it all the more jarring. Ranger's ears perked, and he let out the faintest growl. "Hey, buddy," I murmured, kneeling by him. "It's just the wind." I tried to sound confident, but a prickle of unease crawled up my arms. We were alone out here, which was exactly what I'd wanted. Yet, for some reason, the solitude started to feel suffocating. I gathered some kindling and small branches. The dryness of fallen leaves made it fairly easy to get a flame going. The burst of orange and yellow was comforting, a barrier between my meager camp and the blackness beyond. Ranger settled at my feet, lying on his belly, but he kept raising his head to peer at the tree line. It must have been around 10 p.m. when the uneasy stillness returned. The wind died suddenly, as if someone had flipped a switch. My small campfire took on an oddly purple hue for a moment. I stared at it, but within seconds it was just a regular fire again. Probably a trick of my eyes adjusting to the dark. I crawled into the tent, heart hammering for no good reason. Ranger came in after me, curling up by my feet. I'd planned to read or journal, but exhaustion from the hike overcame me. Sleep claimed me faster than I expected. Sometime in the middle of the night, I heard whispering again. This time, accompanied by the distinct sound of footsteps circling my tent. I froze, my heart in my throat. Ranger lifted his head and growled, a low rumble that sent chills across my arms. I was too afraid to unzip the tent and shine my flashlight outside. The steps paused, and then softly, I heard a voice that sounded so much like my brother's. "Emily, let me in." The next thing I knew, I jolted awake to early dawn light. My sleeping bag was unzipped and pushed to the side. Ranger's bag lay open, unzipped from the inside. Ranger, tail wagging, nudged my arm. The weirdness of the night might have been a nightmare, but the unzipped bags didn't feel like it. My gut told me something had entered our tent, or we had somehow left it without remembering. I tried to laugh it off as I climbed out, but outside I discovered fresh footprints near the rear of the tent, tiny like those of a child. They circled the tent and vanished into the brush. Ranger refused to go sniff them, whining instead and staying close to me. Over breakfast, I tried checking my phone's GPS to verify our location and see if there was an easier route back if I decided to shorten my trip. My phone was almost dead, despite being fully charged the night before, and unused for anything except a few quick checks. I cursed under my breath, rummaging in my pack for the external charger. As I unzipped the main compartment, I realized my entire supply of freeze-dried food for the trip was gone. The bag that contained it had vanished. Panic fluttered in my chest. That was supposed to last me 4 days. I still had some snack bars, a can of stew, and dog food for Ranger, but definitely not enough for the entire planned retreat. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe some animal had crept into camp while I slept and dragged off the bag. I glanced around but saw no sign of scattered packets or chewed plastic. The bag was simply gone. "Damn it," I muttered. "We might have to shorten our trip." Ranger wagged his tail slightly, as if he'd be okay with that. I decided not to pack up immediately. I wasn't ready to let the forest scare me out after just one full day. Instead, I thought I'd explore a bit, see if maybe I'd place the food somewhere else in the delirium of last night. As I walked deeper among the trees, I noticed the area felt off somehow. I was following what I thought was a southbound trail, but the map I held no longer seemed to match. Paths that were marked clearly as leading to the creek ended in dead ends. Trails I remembered from the day before just weren't there. Maybe I just had a cheap map, or my sense of direction was abysmal. Still, it gave me a constant, gnawing anxiety. I tried using my phone's compass, It spun lazily in circles before freezing on north. The battery icon blinked with a bright red slash. By the time I found my way back to camp, it was mid-afternoon. The sun was behind some thick gray clouds, and a brisk wind rustled the canopy. My mouth felt parched. I reached for my water bottle, only to find it brimful with black dirt and squirming worms. I nearly dropped it. What the hell? Ranger sniffed the bottle, but jerked his head away. I scanned the area, half expecting to see footprints again. None. Nothing had been disturbed, except my water supply. I rummaged in the tent and found an old backup bottle I'd stashed inside a sweater. Thank God it was still normal water. I tossed the contaminated bottle aside in disgust, silently cursing whatever raccoon or fox might have messed with it, though realistically no wild animal would have filled a bottle with dirt and worms. I needed to calm down. Maybe I just scooped from the creek by mistake, but that didn't explain the worms, or the footprints from the night before. Night came again, unnervingly quickly. I prepared a small meal with the leftover stew, feeding Ranger a portion of his dog food. The entire forest seemed to watch me. Once again, the wind died at sundown, as though nature itself was in on some cosmic joke. I struggled to light the fire. The kindling just wouldn't catch, even though I'd successfully done it the previous night. When it finally did, the flames burned with a weird, bluish hue. I sat close, hugging myself for warmth as the temperature dropped. My thoughts drifted to Sam. For some reason, the memory of him in his hospital bed, pale from an overdose, flashed in my mind. I'd been too late to save him. Why was I haunted by that out here in the forest? Ranger growled, snapping me out of my reverie. He was fixated on a shape at the edge of the light. Small, white, childlike. My heart raced. "Hello," I called. My voice wavered. "Are you lost?" The figure stepped forward. It was indeed a child, maybe 8 years old, wearing a white t-shirt and jeans, barefoot. His face was pale, eyes wide and dark. He looked almost luminous against the gloom of the trees. "Are you okay?" I asked, standing slowly, hands raised in what I hoped was a non-threatening gesture. "Where are your parents?" He didn't blink. He just stared, smiling. "You're early," he said in a soft voice. "You're not supposed to be here yet." My stomach flipped. That was such an odd thing to say. "What do you mean?" He took a half step closer. Ranger bared his teeth and the boy stopped. Slowly, the boy's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too straight, almost artificial. I swallowed. "Did you take my food?" No reply. He just stared, eyes never leaving mine. The air around us felt colder. The forest behind him was silent, like the entire scene was waiting for me to make the next move. Suddenly, the boy turned and walked away into the darkness. Ranger let out a short bark and lunged forward, but I held him back. Something told me we did not want to follow. I sat back down by the fire, trembling, my thoughts spinning. A child, alone out here. The sensible side of me insisted I should try to help, but my instincts recoiled. That boy's presence felt wrong. I stayed up late, the fire burning low, listening for any sound of footsteps. None came. Eventually, exhaustion took over and I retreated to the tent. I made sure to zip it up tightly, checking the perimeter with my flashlight. Ranger lay at my feet, still tensed. I drifted into a restless sleep. Just before I lost consciousness, I heard my brother's voice again, whispering something too soft to catch. I bolted awake at dawn, heart pounding. Ranger was gone. His sleeping bag was unzipped, the tent flap was open. Panic churned my stomach. "Ranger!" I scrambled outside, ignoring the biting cold. The morning mist clung to the trees, turning everything into a ghostly silhouette. My voice echoed as I shouted his name. Where was he? He never went far from me, ever. Nearly an hour passed as I searched among the trees, frantic. I pictured all the worst outcomes. Maybe a bear took him, or he got snared in underbrush. I'd almost given up when he appeared, limping and soaked, muzzle covered in mud. Oh my God, buddy! I ran to him, kneeling down. He looked dazed, fur streaked with wet leaves, trembling. I examined him for injuries but found no visible blood, no obvious wounds. He whimpered when I touched his front paw, though, and I worried he'd sprained something. I coaxed him back to camp, dried him off, and gave him some water and a little food. He stared up at me with sad eyes as if trying to warn me about something. Yet he couldn't speak, and I was left with my own mounting fear. After that, I told myself enough was enough. I had to leave. I'd only been here for 2 nights, but it felt like a lifetime. Weird footprints, a missing child, the vanishings of supplies, my phone battery mysteriously drained, the sense that time itself was warping around me. I pulled out my map to plan a quick route back to the trailhead. That's when I discovered it no longer aligned with the terrain. The trails that were supposed to head west were blocked by brambles, or simply disappeared among the trees. The faint path that had led me to my campsite seemed to snake away in the wrong direction. My frustration mounted. I attempted to follow a ridgeline that should have taken me near the main road. Instead, I ended up circling back to a stream with muddy banks. At one point, I noticed a second set of footprints in the mud. Small, barefoot, leading away. My throat went dry. I had the feeling I was being led in circles. Around noon, I found my way to a slightly open area by the creek, and that's where I met Laura. She was crouched near the water, refilling a plastic bottle. Her backpack was set aside, and she wore a bright red jacket and hiking pants. Her hair was a messy ponytail, and she looked up at me with equal parts alarm and relief. Hey, oh my God, I'm so glad to see another person. She stood, cradling her bottle. I'm Laura, been lost out here for a few hours, I guess. Emily, I said, forcing a smile. My throat felt scratchy from yelling for Ranger earlier, so my words came out hoarse. I've been trying to find a way back too. She glanced at Ranger, who was limping behind me. Poor dog, what happened? I shook my head, not ready to explain the weirdness. He disappeared last night, came back like this. Laura nodded sympathetically, rummaging through her pack. I've got some food I can share with you if you need it. I'm worried I'm lost, though. My phone died, and the maps out here aren't exactly well marked. Relief washed over me. Finally, another human being who wasn't a pale, barefoot child. I'd appreciate it, I said. I lost most of my supplies. She gave me a granola bar and half a bag of trail mix. Ranger sniffed at her suspiciously but didn't growl. I noticed something odd, though. Her clothes were spotless, like they had just come off a store rack. Mine were filthy and caked with mud. Maybe she was just a neat freak, or maybe she'd started her hike earlier that morning. We decided to try to find a main trail together. We walked for what felt like hours, discussing how we both ended up here. She claimed she'd planned a day hike from a different trailhead, but got turned around. Now she wanted to get out before nightfall. At some point, we heard rustling in the trees behind us. I spun around expecting to see a deer, but for a split second I glimpsed something that looked like a small child darting behind a tree. My stomach clenched. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Laura shrugged. "A squirrel, maybe?" I let it drop, but my nerves were shot. Eventually, after more winding attempts, we realized the sun was sinking again. We had no choice but to make camp. "Let's stay together," Laura suggested. "I think 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. I agreed. We found a relatively flat spot in a clearing. ringed by thick oaks. We collected firewood, but for some reason, everything felt damp. Even the tinder. After countless attempts, I finally managed to coax a feeble flame, which quickly sputtered out. We tried again, and it burned for a few minutes before it vanished in a hiss of steam. Laura cursed and tossed her lighter aside. We ended up huddling under a tarp, the temperature dropping fast. Ranger lay pressed to my side for warmth. The forest closed in around us, a black labyrinth, silent except for the occasional crack of a branch or rustle of leaves. The moon was high, but it gave no real comfort. I felt exhaustion pulling at me, the day's tension draining my energy. At some point, I dozed off. When I awoke, maybe an hour later, I saw Laura's silhouette standing at the clearing's edge, unmoving. "Laura?" I called softly. She didn't answer. I got up, my muscles stiff with cold, and approached her. She was staring out into the trees, smiling faintly. "Laura?" I repeated, placing a hand on her shoulder. Her skin felt hot, almost feverish. She turned to me, her eyes reflecting the moonlight in a strange way. "I was gathering wood," she said, her voice flat. "Are you all right?" She kept smiling, blinking too slowly. "Gathering wood," she repeated. I stepped back, uneasy. Ranger whined behind me. Laura's gaze drifted past me toward the dark silhouettes of the forest. "He's here," she whispered, that unnerving smile never leaving her lips. "Who's here?" I asked, my heart pounding. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked back to the tarp and stood there, arms limp at her sides, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. I managed to catch a bit more sleep, but it was plagued by nightmares. Sam's face contorted in agony, those child-sized footprints circling me. The boy's voice telling me I was early for something. When morning came, I found Laura in the same spot, upright but swaying slightly, as if she'd stayed there all night. My watch read 6 in the morning, but the sky looked much darker, almost like a perpetual twilight. She turned to me, her face vacant. "Laura, are you feeling okay?" She blinked once, too slow. "I'm fine." I quickly checked on Ranger. He was lying down with his muzzle on his paws, watching Laura warily. I tried to gather my thoughts. Should I just leave her? Try to find my own way out? But she was my only human companion at this point, and something about her condition made me worry that if I left her alone, I'd be condemning her to die out here. So I stayed. The day passed in a haze of attempts to orient ourselves. Nothing worked. My phone was fully dead, and my compass kept giving false readings. The sun, obscured by thick clouds, never seemed to climb high enough in the sky to be midday. It felt like the hours were somehow stuck or skipping. Sometime around what should have been late afternoon, we stumbled upon the same clearing with the tarp that we'd slept in, even though we'd tried walking in a straight line for hours. My frustration boiled over. I kicked a rock, hurting my toes, shouting at the unyielding forest. Laura just stood there, that same eerie half-smile on her lips. "I can't do this anymore," I said, tears of anger stinging my eyes. "We have to find a way out." Then we heard something moving through the underbrush. A small figure stepped into the clearing. It was him, the child from before. Pale, barefoot, wearing the same white shirt and jeans. He stared at us, lips curved in that too-wide grin. Ranger growled, limping in front of me protectively. Laura, however, looked at the child with a near reverent expression. "Caleb," she said softly. The boy's black eyes flicked to her. He tilted his head, then looked at me. "You're still here," he said, voice devoid of emotion. "But you're not supposed to be." I clenched my fists. "What do you want?" He ignored the question. "This forest is mine now," he said, as though reciting a simple fact. "And you're in my place." I can't take you yet because it's not time. Laura took a tentative step toward him. I'll stay, she mumbled. He glanced at her. We're not done with you. In a flash, she lunged. I saw it happen too quickly, as though we were all marionettes in some twisted puppet show. Laura grabbed hold of Ranger's leg and twisted it with a snapping sound that cut me like a blade. Ranger yelped in pain, collapsing onto his side. No! I screamed, rushing to them. I shoved Laura away, horror twisting my gut. My dog was whimpering in agony, his leg clearly broken. Laura stepped back, mouth curled into an emotionless grin. When she spoke, a voice that wasn't hers spilled out. Gentle, childlike, yet dripping with menace. He's only an animal, she said. I drew my pocket knife, something I'd been carrying for safety. Adrenaline surged through me, wild and desperate. Stay away from us. Laura advanced, arms outstretched. Her eyes rolled back to reveal solid white, like marbles. Her grin widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp. I slashed at her, and a thick inky fluid dribbled from the gash. She hissed, or maybe it was the boy who hissed, echoing through her throat. Then the child spoke again, unruffled by Laura's wound. I can bring Sam back, he said, staring directly at me with those bottomless eyes. I froze. The mention of my brother's name made me feel like I'd been stabbed in the chest. What do you mean? He took a step closer, raising a hand. I know you blame yourself for not saving him. I can fix that mistake. He can join us here forever. My mind reeled. How did he know about Sam? A swirl of grief, guilt, and confusion threatened to overwhelm me. But the sight of Ranger writhing in pain, the black sludge dripping from Laura's wound, brought me back to reality. Get away from me, I shouted, forcing my legs to move. I grabbed Ranger's collar, struggling to lift his weight. His injured leg hung at a sick angle, but I had to move. If we stayed, we were dead. We stumbled off into the trees. Laura made no immediate move to follow, but I heard the boy's voice echo. Run if you want. You'll come back around. You always do. I half-carried, half-dragged Ranger, tears streaming down my face as he whimpered. The forest was darkening again, but it felt wrong for the time of day. I saw glimpses of shapes among the trees, childlike silhouettes all too still. My mind spun with terror, convinced that multiple children were watching me, identical to the boy I'd just confronted. We emerged onto a slope near the ruins of Hope Furnace at the edge of the forest. Except it looked different. The structure was somehow more decayed than I remembered, or perhaps I was seeing it in a different light. But at least it was a landmark. Maybe I could figure out how to get back to my car. Night fell abruptly, as though a curtain had dropped on the sun. I set Ranger down gently near the side of the furnace, rummaging through my bag for anything that might help. My supplies were nearly gone. The few things I had left were a lighter, a water bottle, and a small tin of salt. I'd brought the salt to add flavor to my freeze-dried meals, never expecting it might serve a different purpose. Ranger whined softly. His leg needed a splint, or at the very least, I had to keep him from moving. I tore off part of my shirt and used a sturdy stick as best I could to stabilize his broken limb. My tears blurred my vision. Hang in there, buddy, I whispered, pressing my forehead to his. I heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate across the leaf-littered ground. My knife was still in my pocket, sticky with inhuman blood. I gripped it tightly. From behind the furnace, the boy emerged. His face was calm, a slight smile still carved into his features. The wind whipped around us, stirring dead leaves at our feet. You don't want to go back, he said, voice carrying even though it was barely louder than a whisper. There's nothing left for you there. I stood, trembling, placing myself between him and Ranger. My heart pounded in my ears. "You took Laura," I accused, not sure if the words even made sense. "You're controlling her. Let her go." His black eyes didn't blink. "She followed me. You could too. You could have Sam back." The mention of Sam again nearly shattered me. Anger welled up. "Stay the hell away from me." He raised a hand, and I felt the air shift. Shadows seemed to lengthen, and a relentless wave of nausea rolled through me. For a moment, I heard Sam's voice whispering my name, and I almost staggered forward, but the whimper from Ranger anchored me. I recalled something, a fleeting memory from my grandmother, an old superstition. Evil can't cross salt. She used to make a ring of salt at the door whenever she prayed. Could it possibly help here? I had nothing to lose. Dropping to one knee, I poured a circle of salt around Ranger and myself. The moment the grains hit the ground, the boy's expression flickered. He took a single step forward but stopped at the invisible barrier. "What is this?" he asked, tone suddenly edged with frustration. I didn't answer. My hand slid over the ground until I found a jagged piece of iron slag near the furnace ruins. It felt heavy, sharp on one side, maybe left over from the days when they smelted ore here. The boy hissed, stepping back. I realized he was flickering. His shape blurred, like I was seeing him through heat haze. I forced myself to stand, heart threatening to explode from my chest. I stepped over the salt line, brandishing the piece of slag. "Let us go," I demanded, voice shaking. His grin returned, unnaturally wide. "It's not time," he repeated, stepping forward. He tried to grab me, but I slashed wildly with the iron, connecting with his shoulder. A scream tore from his throat, not the voice of a child, but something ancient and guttural. Tar-black liquid gushed from the wound, steaming on the ground. The smell was nauseating like burnt hair and sulfur. He staggered, eyes blazing with fury. "You'll come back," he growled through gritted teeth, clutching the wound. "You always do. They all do." I raised the slag again, prepared to strike. He turned abruptly and vanished into the darkness. One moment he was there, the next gone, leaving only the stench of sulfur behind. Ranger whimpered. I turned to him, collapsing to my knees. I had to get him to a vet, but how? My car was still a mile away if I could find the right path, and time was behaving strangely. Clenching my jaw, I scooped Ranger into my arms, ignoring the agony in my muscles. The forest seemed to ripple, but I forced myself forward, step by step. I remembered the route from the furnace parking lot vividly, if it was still the same route. The trees around me felt twisted, like the shapes of them were contorting at the edges of my vision. The darkness had a bluish cast, lit by a moon that seemed too large and faint. My watch read 2:13 a.m., but I had no idea if that meant anything anymore. Halfway through the trees, I lost my footing on a slope and slid, hitting the ground hard. Ranger yelped. I cursed, spat leaves, and kept going. I had to. My head swam with disorientation. I could have sworn I heard someone calling my name. Not Sam this time, my own voice echoing back at me. At last, I saw the faint reflection of metal. My car, still in the gravel lot, unbelievably close. Relief nearly tore a sob from my throat. I staggered to the driver's side door, set Ranger gently on the ground, and fumbled with my keys. My hands shook so badly, it took me 3 tries to get the key in the lock. I yanked open the door, lifted Ranger inside, and slammed the door behind us. I locked it out of sheer paranoia. The engine sputtered, took a moment, then roared to life. My phone was dead, but I didn't care. I needed to drive. Peeling out of the lot, I aimed the car down the gravel road. My headlights cut through the dense trees, and for an instant I saw the pale figure of that boy by the roadside, head tilted. Blood, or something like it, still oozing from his shoulder. His eyes glowed in the headlights, and I nearly swerved off the road. By the time I got the car straightened, he was gone. I drove. I kept expecting to be turned around to end up back at the furnace. But after a few miles, the trees thinned, replaced by farmland. My relief was immeasurable. I passed an old sign that said, Zaleski, 5 miles, though the direction felt reversed from where it should have been. It was dawn when I found a vet clinic in a small town. I pounded on the door until someone answered. Ranger got treated for his broken leg, and they sedated him to ease the pain. I was shaking, on the verge of collapse. Here's the strangest part. When I asked the vet's assistant what day it was, she told me it was October 17th. I had started my trip on October 12th, planning to spend 4 days, which should have brought me to October 16th at the latest. Somehow I'd lost or gained a day, yet my watch still read the 14th. Even more confusing was that my co-workers had filed a missing persons report. They said I'd been gone for almost 2 weeks, hadn't shown up for shifts, and didn't answer any calls. None of that should be possible. The timeline was shattered. Eventually, after I made phone calls to reassure people I was safe, I sank into the single motel bed that night and sobbed until my throat burned. Ranger slept at my side, a cast on his leg. I dreamt of the child, or the devil, or whatever that thing was, beckoning me back with Sam's voice. When I finally returned to Columbus, the sense of dislocation lingered. My neighbors told me that a concerned friend had come by a week ago, looking for me. The police discovered my house locked, but said there were muddy footprints by the windows. They wanted me to come in and answer questions, which I did, though I didn't have any good answers. I tried to explain it away as a miscommunication, as though maybe I'd lost track of time on the trails. But some nights, I wake up from a vivid dream of Zaleski, the boy's black eyes floating in darkness, whispering, "You'll be back. You always come back." The official record states that I was out there for at least 10 days, unaccounted for. My watch still claims I was only gone 3. Ranger's cast came off weeks later, but he's never been the same. He startles easily, hates being alone at night, and sometimes stares at the corners of rooms, growling softly at things I can't see. I never found Laura again. I tried searching local missing persons reports, even posted online to see if anyone recognized the name or description. Nothing. It was as though she appeared just for that moment, for that twisted purpose. A month later, I finally worked up the nerve to open my camping journal. I found entry after entry in a script I didn't recognize. Pages full of scribbles, each scrawled with the same phrase. "I'll wait for you. You'll be back." No matter how many times I read it, the letters never change. They're written in a childish hand, and I can't remember writing them. Yet there they are. Sometimes, in the quiet hours between night shifts, I wonder if maybe the boy was right about everything. I think of that circle of salt around the furnace, the iron slag that drew black blood. I think of how he promised to bring Sam back. I think of how easily my grief might sway me to return to those woods just to see my brother one more time. But then I remember Ranger's scream and the break in his leg. I remember Laura's vacant smile and the unnatural hush that smothered the forest. I recall the footprints outside my tent, the unzipped sleeping bags, and the utter distortion of time. I can't go back, I won't. Yet, I can't escape the suffocating dread that one day I'll hear that child's voice again. The phone will ring in an empty house at midnight, and I'll hear, "Emily, let me in." I keep a container of salt by my front door. I've poured a thin line along every windowsill. Ranger sleeps with one eye open, half alert as if expecting an intruder. My dreams remain haunted, each sunrise feeling just a little different than it should. My name is Emily Foster. I'm 31 years old, and if there's one thing I learned in those woods of Zaleski State Forest, it's this. Some devils look like children, and once you stumble into their domain, they never really let you go. I'm safe, I tell myself. I'm home. But every night I see that child's footprints by my bed in my nightmares. And in some silent corner of my mind, I know one thing beyond doubt. I was never supposed to be there. But I was. And the forest, with that pale child lurking, is still waiting, biding its time until it can pull me, and who knows how many others, back into its twisted grasp. My name is Liam Carter. I'm 32 years old. This happened in June of 2023 when I decided to camp in one of the deepest parts of Tar Hollow State Forest in Ohio. I wanted an escape from everything. My draining IT job, my family's constant questions, and the gnawing sense that I had made a terrible mistake in letting go of someone I once loved. If I'm honest, I just needed to clear my head. I never expected the wilderness to swallow me whole. I never expected to face such horrors that I still question my own sanity. I planned a short trip, 4 days, maybe 5, deep in Tar Hollow's lesser-known trails, well away from designated campsites. I'd researched a bit online and found references to old logging paths, trails that never made it onto official maps. 1 or 2 hikers claimed you could find perfect, untouched clearings where phone service was non-existent. That was what I was after. I pictured myself journaling, maybe whittling a piece of driftwood, building a fire under starlight while my dog snoozed at my feet. I thought it would be good for both of us, me, to breathe fresh air again, and Max, my German Shepherd mix, to run free. I should mention Max. He's 5 years old, with thick sable fur and an unwavering loyalty. He'd been with me through some difficult times, and if there was any companion I trusted in the woods, it was him. We'd done a few shorter hikes, day trips mainly, but nothing like this. We were both excited, or at least I was. Max just wagged his tail and panted whenever I said the word forest. The first day went smoothly. I parked my truck at a dusty trailhead that looked half abandoned. The wooden sign cracked, covered in graffiti. By early afternoon, we had ventured into the thick canopy of Tar Hollow. The sunlight dappled through the leaves. The forest smelled rich with moss and rotting logs, the air thick and a little humid. Max was bounding ahead, occasionally looking back to make sure I was following. My backpack was heavy, but in a satisfying way. I had enough supplies: freeze-dried meals, trail mix, a filtration kit, a flashlight, fire starters, and a brand new phone charger pack. I left my laptop at home on purpose. This was meant to be a total disconnection. As the sun lowered, I kept checking my phone to gauge the time. It was around 6 p.m. when the battery inexplicably dropped from 85% to 0. I tapped the screen, confused. The phone blinked off. I tried plugging it into my fully charged power bank, but nothing happened. At first, it struck me as just an annoying glitch. I told myself I'd worry about it later. Max and I made camp in a spot that looked level enough. It wasn't an official campsite, but it had a decent clearing. Nearby, a ring of stones suggested someone had once built a fire there. A single large boulder jutted out from the ground, covered in a sheath of moss. I was tired, so I pitched my tent, rolled out my sleeping bag, fed Max, and gathered wood. Everything felt right, calm even. It wasn't until I lit the campfire that I noticed how oddly the flames danced. They fluttered between bright orange and a faint electric blue, as if invisible chemicals were being burned. I figured it was due to some mineral in the wood, or maybe dampness. The longer I watched, the more it seemed like faces flickered in the fire. Just illusions, I told myself. Fatigue and imagination. When Max began to growl at the brush behind me, I chalked it up to a deer or small critter. I was too tired to investigate. I did manage a small laugh. "You're seeing boogeymen, boy." But my voice sounded hollow. That night, I woke up hearing a low whisper. I assumed it was the wind, except the tone was too deliberate, almost like the hush of someone gossiping. I unzipped the tent, crawled out, and discovered the campfire was out. Embers glowed feebly. Normally, a well-tended campfire might last longer. Shrugging, I tossed on more wood, coaxed it back to life, and swore I heard footsteps just outside the circle of light. Max stood stiffly, hackles raised, eyes fixed on the trees. Yet, no matter how hard I squinted, there was only darkness beyond. Sleep eventually took me again. The next morning, everything felt different. My watch, which read 7 a.m. the previous evening, now showed 2:06 a.m. Even weirder, bright sunlight filtered through the tent. I first thought my watch battery had died, but it was still ticking. It just refused to move from 2:06 a.m. I tried setting it again, but the little hands kept spinning wildly. Then they snapped back to 2:06. Frustrated, I stuffed the watch in my backpack. By that time, Max was whining to go exploring. After a quick breakfast, I decided we'd push deeper into the forest, hoping to find some hidden clearing or vantage point I'd read about. We walked for hours. At least, it felt like hours. The sun was high above. My internal sense of time said it had to be near noon, but my watch was worthless, and my phone remained dead despite multiple attempts at recharging. I had a compass, fortunately. It helped me keep track of direction. Or so I thought, until the compass needle started spinning aimlessly, like it couldn't decide which direction was north. I tapped it, shook it, even tried calibrating it, but it kept swirling. If I set it on a rock, the needle wobbled, then jerked to random angles. I felt goosebumps on my arms. Max sniffed the air, ears pinned back. We came upon a short footpath that branched off the main trail, shadowed by tall pines. Partway along, the pine trees gave way to a ring of twisted oaks. In the center, almost like a bizarre monument, stood a massive stone chair. It was carved, roughly shaped like a throne, I suppose, but chunks of it were chipped, the edges worn with age and moss. Vines draped across the seat. The arms were etched with swirling patterns, or maybe symbols that had weathered into near oblivion. Seeing it made my skin crawl. There was an unnatural hush around the clearing, as if the birds and insects refused to enter. I pulled back the vines and let my fingertips brush the cold stone. Suddenly, I felt lightheaded, like the forest swayed for a moment. Max barked at me as if in warning, so I stepped away. Some people might have felt curiosity or excitement at discovering such an odd artifact. But I was disturbed. It looked more ominous than historical. I'd read a local rumor in passing about devil's chairs, these superstitious seats in old cemeteries that might invite the presence of spirits if you sat in them at midnight. A silly story, I'd thought at the time. But out here, with my watch broken, no phone, and my dog trembling, I believed a lot more than I used to. I decided it was best to move on, but the forest seemed determined to lead me in circles. We walked for another hour or two, the path doubling back in ways that made no geographical sense. My attempt to track the sun for direction was thwarted by thick canopies overhead. By mid-afternoon, I caught sight of the same ring of twisted oaks. I realized I was back at the stone throne. Only this time, I saw footprints in the dirt near the base. They were fresh, bigger than mine, seemingly from boots or dress shoes. I knelt to examine them, and Max growled. A small part of me wanted to see if someone was around, maybe a local hiker who knew the area. Another part of me wanted to run as fast as I could. Fear kept me pinned there a moment. Finally, I forced myself to keep going. I had enough daylight left to figure out a new route. Night fell too soon. I made a small camp near a large oak, though I was nowhere near comfortable. The moment I tried lighting a fire, the flames hissed and flickered with that same strange blue glow. I told myself it was probably due to damp leaves, some chemical reaction in the wood. But there was a bitter tang in the smoke that made me cough. My eyes watered and my heart pounded for no reason. Max hovered close by, pressed against my leg. Despite the suffocating sense of being watched, nothing stirred. At least, not until midnight, or whatever time it really was, since my watch was useless. That was when I saw him for the first time. I was half asleep next to the sputtering fire when Max jolted upright, ears tall. He let out a snarl so deep it vibrated my chest. I thought it might be a deer or another animal, but then I noticed a figure standing calmly on the far edge of the campfire's glow. He looked like a kindly grandfather, wearing an old-fashioned black suit jacket, as neat as if he'd just stepped out of a Sunday sermon. His hat was broad-brimmed, slightly worn. Where the glow of the fire hit his face, he appeared old but vigorous. His eyes shone unnaturally bright, almost reflective like a cat's. Max bared his teeth, hackles raised. I was too stunned to speak. "Good evening," he said, in a voice that was confident and comforting all at once. "I'm sorry to intrude on your peace. I've been out walking, you see." I stared. There's no trail here," I finally managed. He seemed amused. "You're right, there isn't. But I know my way around these woods better than most. My name is Cray." I swallowed. "Liam," I said. "And this is Max." The old man took a small step forward. My dog snarled again, and Mr. Cray stopped, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "No need for alarm. I assure you, I mean you no harm. Though it's rare to see new faces out here." He paused, eyeing me. "Let me guess, you got lost." "Maybe," I admitted. "My compass isn't working." His eyes flicked to my pack, then to my watch, though I hadn't told him about it. "Yes, strange things happen in these hollows," he said, almost to himself. "I was about to set up my own camp. If you care for some company tomorrow, I could guide you back to civilization." "Thanks, but I'm not ready to go back yet." It was stubborn pride. I came here to be alone. I also had an inexplicable distrust stirring in my gut. The way his presence felt too convenient, his manner too polished. He gave a single slow nod. "Then I won't impose." He tipped his hat, stepping backward. "You know how to find me," he said cryptically, and then melted into the darkness as if he had never been there. Max didn't relax for a long time afterward. Neither did I. My mind whirled. "You know how to find me," the stranger said, like I'd merely need to look. Did he mean the chair? My exhaustion was overwhelming. Eventually, I fell into a fitful sleep. Morning brought no relief. I found my sleeping bag unzipped from the inside, though I distinctly remembered zipping it tight. Worse, my supplies had been tampered with. My freeze-dried meals were torn open, black mold crawling across them, as if they'd rotted overnight. My fresh water, sealed in plastic bottles, was now tinted with a sludge-like substance. The smell made my stomach roll. It was physically impossible. Food doesn't just rot within hours. Sealed water doesn't spontaneously foul. Max whimpered. His usual boundless energy seemed replaced by anxious pacing. I rummaged frantically for anything salvageable. A couple of granola bars looked okay, or at least they didn't smell rancid, but I couldn't fully trust them. Nausea churned in my belly at the sight of that black mold. I half expected it to be some elaborate prank, but who would do that, and how? Pressing on seemed the only option. I told myself there had to be a main road or a trail within a day's hike if I just kept a consistent heading. I picked what I thought was northeast, aiming to get out of Tar Hollow's heart. Max trudged behind, occasionally looking over his shoulder. We didn't get far before the forest changed. The pines grew sparser, replaced by more twisted oaks and patches of stinging nettles. The ground felt soggy, and an unpleasant odor of decay wafted from somewhere unseen. I realized I hadn't eaten properly. My stomach growled painfully, but the memory of that black mold put me off. Eventually, though, I forced down a granola bar. It tasted stale, but not poisonous. The single bottle of water I dared to drink had a tang of metal. My thirst won out. Max lapped some from a collapsible bowl, but seemed uneasy afterward, as if waiting for me to fix everything. By what I guessed was late afternoon, we stumbled onto the ring of twisted oaks and that same monstrous stone chair again. My heart sank. Hadn't I walked in a straight line all day? Max started to tremble the moment we stepped into the clearing. He let out a low whimper, avoiding the throne. Odd footprints still dotted the ground, but now they seemed joined by more prints, like multiple sets of heavy boots, or the same set walking in circles. I approached cautiously, glancing around for any sign of Mr. Cray. Nothing. My hair stood on end as I noticed fresh scratch marks scored into the back of the stone chair. They spelled no letters I recognized, just ragged lines. One fresh scratch dripped with a dark substance that might have been sap or something worse. A voice behind me nearly stopped my heart. "You found it again, I see." I spun to face Mr. Cray. He stood behind me, looking at the chair like an art critic. He wore the same black suit, not a speck of dirt on it. "How?" I stammered, uncertain of what to even ask first. "I've been trying to get out of these woods all day." He tilted his head in sympathetic amusement. "These woods are tricky if you don't know their paths." "Do you?" I asked, forcing steadiness into my voice. He smiled, wide enough that I caught a glimpse of unnaturally white teeth. "I've lived here a very long time." Max let out a trembling growl. Cray's gaze flicked to the dog, then back to me. "Perhaps you're ready for my help now," he said, too casually. I felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Fear, curiosity, desperation. But a deeper instinct told me not to trust him. "I can manage," I said. "We'll find our way eventually." Cray sighed, almost regretfully, and walked around the chair. His boots left no footprints that I could see. "Everyone thinks that," he said, pressing a hand to the mossy seat. "But this place changes people, changes animals too." He raised an eyebrow at Max. "Don't wait too long to accept a helping hand." I clenched my fists, trying not to show my nerves. "Why are you here? What do you want?" Mr. Cray patted the back of the chair. "I'm just a friend, a caretaker. This is my family heirloom, you might say." His lips curled into a slight smirk. "If you ever need to sit down or talk about a trade, I'll be here." Without waiting for a reply, he walked off, disappearing into the thick brush without a single twig snapping. The next 2 nights were pure torment. I tried making a new camp each time, tried to stay away from that cursed clearing, but it didn't matter. My sense of direction was gone. My attempts to navigate by the sun only led me back to the same ring of twisted oaks. My food continued to spoil if I didn't eat it right away. My water filters clogged with black slime. The campfire, whenever I managed to spark one, sometimes burned in unnatural hues. Blue, green, occasionally a white so bright it hurt my eyes. I became convinced that the forest was either alive or possessed by something that wanted me disoriented. My nights were full of strange whispering. Once, I jerked awake to a rustling sound and discovered the silhouette of a person crouched just outside my tent. But by the time I got my flashlight on, they were gone. Another time, I awoke to Max whining at me, his eyes reflecting this eerie glow as if from distant headlights. Then came the worst morning yet. I unzipped my tent, greeted by a smell that gagged me. All around the campsite were scraps of fur and small bones, like some monstrous feast had taken place. Max was cowering, tail tucked as if he'd been traumatized. The fire pit was cold and half filled with blackened lumps that might have been flesh. My stomach heaved, and I retched behind a log. I had to get out. I decided to ignore caution and simply push forward in one direction, no matter how many times the forest tried to spin me around. That day, the terrain got uglier. A swampy area of murky pools, vines hanging like nooses, gnats swarming thick enough to choke me. In spots, the ground was so soft it nearly swallowed my boots. Max looked miserable, limping occasionally, his paws caked with mud. Hours later, though it was impossible to measure time properly, we found ourselves on drier ground with fewer gnats. I collapsed against a tree and rummaged in my backpack. What little trail mix I had left was peppered with mold spores. My canteen water reeked. Thirst overcame me again. I drank anyway, gagging at the metallic taste. That was the first time I noticed Max's behavior shift. He stood a few feet away, staring at me as if I were a stranger. His ears were pinned back, and his eyes looked oddly glassy. "It's okay, boy," I said weakly. "We'll get home soon, I promise." He bared his teeth for a fraction of a second, but quickly turned it into a whine. My breath caught in my throat. Max had never shown aggression to me, not once. It had to be stress, fear, hunger, maybe even some infection from the water. At some point, I fell asleep sitting against the tree, my head slumped to the side. When I opened my eyes, it was dark. The moonlight filtered through the canopy, making shapes in the shadows. My watch read 2:06 a.m., of course. I sensed movement in front of me and saw Max standing over a limp shape, a rabbit or possum, I couldn't tell. He was ripping it apart with savage intensity. Blood dripped from his jowls. My head reeled. He'd always been a gentle dog, but we'd never starved or been lost in a haunted forest together. "Max," I whispered. He froze, turned his head slowly, and watched me with an unsettling calm. I saw no recognition in his eyes, just a reflective, predatory stare. A moment later, he shook his fur, trotted a few steps, and lay down as if nothing had happened. My heart wouldn't stop racing. I worried that he might turn on me next. That night, I was jolted awake again by the unmistakable voice of Mr. Cray. I scrambled up, brandishing the one weapon I had, my hunting knife. But Mr. Cray wasn't near me. He stood about 10 yards away, speaking in a soft, sibilant tone to Max. My dog was sitting perfectly still, head tilted, as if listening. My spine prickled. I couldn't hear exactly what Cray was saying, but I caught fragments. "Yes, you're doing so well, and he'll come around." Then Max blinked, lowering his ears like a submissive pup. I'd never seen him so cowed, not even in training. As I approached, my flashlight flickering in and out, Cray glanced over his shoulder. "Still holding out, Liam?" he said, as calm as ever. "You look exhausted. Let me help you." "Stay away from my dog," I snapped, "and stay away from me." He arched an eyebrow. "Your dog? Are you certain he's still yours?" Something about his tone made me step back. Without another word, Cray turned and disappeared, leaving Max standing in the darkness, his sides heaving. "Max!" I hissed. He didn't even look at me. After a few seconds, he trotted over, but it was a slow, deliberate movement. His eyes were dull, almost lifeless. I felt a twist of fear in my gut as I sat back down, knife still gripped tightly. I didn't sleep again that night. We ended up stumbling onto a small clearing by late morning. It wasn't the ring of oaks, thank God, but it looked as though someone had camped there recently. Burned logs formed a loose fire pit, and a few footprints littered the muddy ground. My hope soared that maybe a real human, someone other than Cray, had come through. Maybe I could find them. Rummaging around, I spotted a blackened tin can half buried near the ashes. No sign of fresh supplies, though. Max was panting, drooling excessively like he was overheated. I almost considered leaving him behind if he got aggressive, but the thought tore at me. He was my dog, my best friend in many ways. I felt the slight breeze that carried a faint sound of trickling water. If there was a stream nearby, I could at least rinse out the canteen, try to filter new water. We followed the sound, pushing through some undergrowth until we found a narrow creek. The water was surprisingly clear. But as I knelt to fill my canteen, I heard a splash downstream. Max bristled, started to growl softly. The hair on the back of my neck rose. I snuck forward, pulling aside some branches. There, crouched in the shallows, was a figure. Tall, gaunt, wearing dark clothes splotched with mud. My heart jolted, thinking it might be Cray, but it was someone else, a man with short-cropped hair and a hollow look in his eyes. His hands were in the water, slowly washing blood off a ragged piece of cloth. "Hey," I called softly, stepping out from the bushes. "You need help?" He jerked around with a haunted expression, dropping the cloth. Who are you?" he rasped. "Liam," I said, lifting my hands to show I wasn't a threat. "I'm lost out here, my dog and I. We ran into some weird stuff." His gaze darted to Max. Keep him away." The man's voice shook. He looked half-starved, dark circles under his eyes. He wore battered hiking boots, torn cargo pants, and a plain jacket. "Don't come any closer," he whispered, eyes flicking around fearfully. "Okay, man," I said, heart pounding. "Can you tell me how to get back to a main trail? Or a road?" He stood unsteadily. "There are no roads," he muttered. "Not anymore. I've been trying for days. Or weeks." He trailed off, glancing at the bloody cloth. "I was here with my brother. He went for wood and came back. Different. He just stared at me. Wouldn't speak. His eyes, they weren't his eyes. Last night he tried to kill me. Tears welled in his eyes. I stabbed him, left him for dead." He coughed out a desperate, humorless laugh. "But I can still hear him calling my name at night." A chill rippled down my spine. "What's your name?" "Paul," he said after a long pause. He swayed on his feet. "Don't trust your dog," he warned. "And don't trust the old man in the suit." My mouth went dry. "So you've seen him?" "He made me an offer," Paul whispered. "Something about letting me go if I gave him my brother's soul. I thought it was a nightmare, but now my brother's changed. Or possessed. I don't even know if I killed him or just slowed him down." Paul started shaking violently. "I have to keep moving or he'll find me again." I wanted to ask more, but Paul darted off with a burst of manic energy, stumbling through the underbrush. Max barked once, but didn't chase. I stood there, water dripping from my canteen, pulse hammering. Paul's words echoed in my head. "Don't trust your dog, don't trust the old man." Everything about this place was a twisted labyrinth of fear and illusions. I was truly caught in it, and I had no idea how to get out. That evening, I tried one more time to make a camp. My hunger was becoming dire, and I found some wild berries. I recognized them as blackberries, safe enough. Still, I had a nagging fear that everything in this forest was contaminated. I ate them anyway, desperate for something not rotted. Max watched me from a short distance, his eyes nearly unblinking. The fire this time refused to catch. Every piece of kindling I gathered refused to light or crackled into bright, short-lived bursts that died immediately. Eventually, I gave up, huddling in the dark. A breeze carried faint voices which might have been birds or illusions. I heard my own name whispered in the leaves. Liam. Liam. Sometime in the night, Max got up and padded away. I was half drifting in and out of restless dreams, but noticed his absence. Maybe he went to chase a deer again. Nervous, I decided to follow. I picked up my flashlight, its beam weak despite fresh batteries, and moved through the forest. I didn't get far before I spotted a silhouette. It was Max, standing upright looking at something. My flashlight flickered, revealing a second figure, Mr. Cray. They were facing each other, the dog's ears pricked, Cray's expression calm and inviting. "Time is almost up," Cray was saying, his voice low. "He'll come around if he wants to live." Max tilted his head, then slowly swiveled to face me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Then a wave of cold dread washed over me. His eyes seemed too bright, reflecting my flashlight like a pair of polished marbles. He stared, unblinking, for far too long. "Max," I whispered, tears prickling my eyes. "Come here, boy." He trotted toward me, tail wagging, but something about his motion was off. Too slow, too deliberate. When he reached me, he pressed his head into my side like he used to do, yet his body felt tense. I glanced up at Cray, who gave me a wide, pleasant smile. "You're trembling," he commented mildly. "Don't worry. Soon, all debts will be settled." I mustered my courage. "What do you want?" He took a step forward, hands clasped behind his back. "I offer you a way out. A trade, if you will." "Trade for what?" I growled. Cray's voice turned silkier. "Your place on the seat. Or perhaps the dog's place. Doesn't matter, truly. The forest must be fed. One soul to let the other go, that's how it has always been." "Go to hell," I spat, hugging Max protectively. But the dog wriggled free of my arms and trotted to Cray's side. My stomach lurched with horror and heartbreak. Cray nodded, as if expecting it, then turned and walked away into the dark. Max followed a few paces before disappearing behind some trees. I stood there, paralyzed. Could a dog be possessed? It felt ridiculous, but so did everything else in this forest. Eventually, I stumbled back to my campsite and collapsed in my tent, trembling. I didn't sleep. When dawn came, or when the sky turned lighter, I emerged from the tent, hoping Max was back to normal. Instead, he was nowhere. No paw prints, nothing. I called for him until my voice was ragged. Silence. Anger replaced my fear. Anger at Cray, at these cursed woods, even at my dog for abandoning me. I packed my gear, ignoring how the straps dug into my raw shoulders. I marched in a straight line, ignoring everything else. It worked for a while. I didn't see the ring of twisted oaks or the stone chair for hours. The forest seemed to resist, thick branches scraping me, brambles catching my pant legs. My ankles turned on hidden roots. My progress was agonizingly slow. Then I spotted footprints in the mud again, fresh ones, leading off to the left. They looked similar to what I'd seen near the chair. Unsure of what else to do, I followed them. Maybe I could find Paul again, or anyone who wasn't Cray. After a half-mile, I heard a sound that made my heart jump. Flowing water, a bigger stream or small river from the volume of it. I quickened my pace until I broke through the brush to find a rocky creek bed. The water was clearer than the swampy puddles I'd seen. Relief flooded me. I scrambled down to the bank, scooped water into my canteen, and drank deeply. The cold liquid was exhilarating. For a few moments, I felt almost human again, not a wraith haunting these cursed woods. Then I heard rustling behind me. I spun around to see Max. He stood on the creek bank, panting. My heart soared with relief, but it died on my lips when I saw the dark stains marring his fur around his muzzle and paws. Blood. His eyes were still glassy. He stepped forward. I noticed something clenched in his jaws, a piece of cloth or flesh, I couldn't tell. He dropped it on the rocks and stared at me. My mind raced. "Max?" I called softly. He took another step, head tilted. That's when I realized the cloth he'd dropped looked like part of a shirt, possibly from Paul. A wave of nausea hit me. I raised my flashlight, flicked it on. Max's pupils shone unnaturally bright, and he gave a low, guttural growl. I froze. My beloved dog was regarding me as though I were prey. "Easy, boy," I whispered. "I'm not your enemy." He barked once, a sharp, aggressive sound that threatened to break my heart. My dog had never barked at me like that. I tried to back away slowly, not wanting to provoke him. But he sprang forward, jaws snapping. The force of it knocked me sideways into the creek. I grunted in pain, twisting to keep him away from my throat. Water rushed around me as I realized I still had my hunting knife strapped to my belt. I didn't want to hurt Max. He was my best friend. But in that moment, I saw no recognition in his eyes, only primal rage. He lunged again, teeth bared, saliva flying. I managed to shove him off with one arm while fumbling for the knife with the other. His teeth grazed my forearm, tearing through my jacket and leaving a burning pain. Adrenaline surged through me as I finally yanked out the knife, holding it between us. "Max, stop," I pleaded, tears mixing with creek water on my face. He snarled, showing no sign of stopping. Another leap, I barely dodged, slashing out with the knife to keep him off me. I felt the blade connect with flesh. Max yelped, a blood-curdling sound that tore at my soul. He scrambled back, whimpering, but his eyes still burned with something unnatural. Fresh blood trickled into the creek. My stomach lurched. Shaking violently, I held the knife in front of me. Max circled, limping slightly. The dog I'd raised from a puppy was gone, replaced by a possessed shell. Mr. Cray's words echoed in my head. "It changes animals, too." I realized I might have to kill him, or he'd kill me, my heart hammered with dread and sorrow. Max sprang once more, going for my throat. I braced, slashing desperately. The blade sank in deeper this time, catching him in the side. He yelped again, and his momentum carried him into me, knocking us both to the rocky shore. Somehow, I managed to roll free. When I looked, Max lay there, a dark stain spreading across his ribs. His limbs twitched. A faint whine escaped his throat. My world cracked. I crawled over, ignoring the hot pain in my own arm. "I'm sorry," I choked out, pressing a trembling hand to his head. "I'm so damn sorry." I couldn't stop tears from falling. I stroked his ears one last time as his breathing slowed. His eyes flicked to me for just a second. That 1 second was enough. I saw genuine recognition again, like the real Max was back, confused and hurting. Then the light in his eyes faded. My best friend was gone. I sobbed, cradling his body. The horror of what I had done, and what this forest had done to us, threatened to swallow me whole. Eventually, exhaustion forced me to let him go. I closed his eyes and gently lowered him into the creek. The current tugged at his fur, carrying him away. My heart felt like it had been ripped out. I sat on the shore, knees to my chest, trembling. I must have stayed there for hours or minutes. Time had no meaning. At some point, a soft shuffle behind me jolted me to my feet. My knife was in my hand instantly, but it was Mr. Cray, standing on the rocky embankment, face laced with mock sympathy. "You did what you had to do," he said gently. I screamed at him, a raw, animal noise of hatred. "You twisted him. You made me kill him. He belonged to the forest the moment you both stepped off the path," Cray replied. Your dog gave in. He accepted my offer. You refused, so you had to defend yourself. He paused, his eyes glittering. He would have killed you in another moment. I was panting, tears burning my cheeks. Why? I demanded, voice shaking. Why are you doing this? He spread his hands as if giving a lecture. This place is old, older than your maps. It craves souls to sustain itself. I simply facilitate the exchange. A caretaker, if you will, but we can still make a bargain, you and I. I glared at him, my hatred outweighing reason. I'll never bargain with you. He tilted his head, an infuriating smirk curving his mouth. We'll see. Then he turned and walked upstream, vanishing as silently as ever. My vision blurred with fury, but I had no strength left to chase him. My arm throbbed, blood seeping through the torn sleeve. I needed to find a way out before I bled or starved to death. By the time I recovered enough to move, the sun was near the horizon. At least, it seemed that way through the canopy. The memory of Max's final breath haunted me, but a cold, furious determination flared in my chest. I was getting out, or I was dying in the attempt. I followed the creek downstream for what felt like miles, ignoring hunger pangs and exhaustion. Maybe it would lead to a road or a bigger river, or at least out of these twisted hollows. As evening approached, the creek's banks grew steeper, forming a narrow gorge. I navigated the boulders carefully, fighting dizziness. My stab wound from Max's struggle had reopened, leaving me with a throbbing, blood-soaked bandage of my own shirt. Still, I forced myself forward, every step sending sharp pains through my body. Dying out here in the open seemed better than returning to that cursed ring of oaks. Yet, the ring found me anyway. The creek branched off, twisting into a marshy area. As I skirted the marsh, the trees shifted. I blinked in confusion. Suddenly, there were the same damned twisted oaks, their branches overhead like contorted arms. In the center was the stone throne, the devil's chair glowing faintly in the last light of day. I stood there, chest heaving with disbelief and dread. There was no escaping it. In the clearing, a single figure waited by the chair. Mr. Cray. He pressed a hand to the mossy seat, then beckoned me closer. My instincts screamed for me to run, but I couldn't do it anymore. I was beyond exhaustion, beyond fear. My anger fueled me, overshadowing everything else. I marched forward, knife still in my hand though my grip was weak. He didn't flinch. I see you're in no shape to keep wandering, he said, appraising my blood-soaked arm and trembling legs. You tricked us, I snarled, voice hoarse. You used me, used my dog, drove him mad. Cray shrugged with that maddening calm. I merely offered. The forest did the rest. It's hungry, Liam. It always has been. But it doesn't have to take you. You can make a trade, right now, and walk away. What does that mean? I demanded, through gritted teeth. It's simple. Someone must take the seat. A sacrifice, if you will. Sit in the devil's chair, and you become the new caretaker. I'll go free, you'll remain here, bound to these woods. Or you and I can make another arrangement. Perhaps we can find someone else to take your place. He smiled. That meant Paul, perhaps. My knife trembled in my hand. My blood roared in my ears. For a horrifying second, I considered the possibility. Find Paul, or some other poor soul. Offer them up to these woods so I could escape. My mind recoiled at the idea. I refused to become like Cray, but the alternative was, what? Dying out here, or taking the seat myself, becoming the caretaker? Silence stretched. My heart thumped wildly, adrenaline keeping me from collapse. I felt the forest's presence, oppressive and expectant like it was listening. Cray's eyes glinted with the knowledge that I had no good options. Finally, I let my knife drop to my side. "Never," I rasped. "I won't sacrifice someone else. I won't take your seat. I'd rather die than become like you." A flicker of annoyance crossed his features. "Your dog was an easier candidate," he said softly, a hint of mockery in his tone. "But you killed him. Now you have no one to offer. Are you sure you're ready to die?" I took a shaky step forward, brandishing the blade. "Maybe I can kill you," I said, voice ragged. "End this twisted cycle." Cray smiled a pitying smile. If only it were that simple. He opened his arms, almost inviting the attack. "Come now, try." Rage and despair fueled me. I lunged, ignoring the pain in my arm. The tip of the knife sank into his chest, but there was no blood, no real resistance. His body seemed to shift around the blade like a phantom. He exhaled softly, as if disappointed. "Foolish," he murmured, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. Pain exploded in my arm and I dropped the knife. He flung me aside as though I weighed nothing. I hit the ground hard, chest driving the air out of my lungs. The stone throne loomed behind me, cold against my back. I tried to scramble away, but my muscles felt like jelly. Cray stood over me, adjusting his immaculate suit. "The forest won't let me die, not while I'm caretaker. You, on the other hand, are just a mortal. Broken, battered, starved." I struggled to breathe, my vision blurred. Somewhere, in the back of my mind, I heard Max's final whine echoing. If I didn't do something, I'd end up just another skeleton in these cursed woods, my soul swallowed by whatever darkness thrived here. Summoning every last shred of willpower, I clawed at the ground, found a large chunk of broken stone. I hurled it at Cray with everything I had. The stone struck him in the face. His head snapped to the side. It was enough. He reeled back, surprised, not harmed. But that moment let me surge to my feet. My legs shook as I scooped up my hunting knife again. Cray regained his composure, blood trickling from a gash on his temple. He touched it, staring at the crimson on his fingertips in fascination. "You wounded me," he said, both surprised and indignant. I realized then that the chair behind me was partially broken, maybe from centuries of weather. If I could damage the seat enough. A desperate idea formed in my head. I rushed to the side of the seat, ignoring Cray's flinty glare. Raising the knife like a chisel, I hammered it into one of the carved symbols, trying to break the stone further. "What are you doing?" Cray demanded, voice furious for the first time. He lunged at me, but I swung the knife in a broad arc, catching him across the wrist. He hissed in pain, stepping back. It was the first time I felt something close to triumph. I brought the hilt of my knife down again and again, chipping away at the carved patterns on the throne. Each strike rang through the clearing. I didn't know if it would work, but something in the air shifted as I shattered chunks of stone. The forest roared with a sudden gust of wind, the trees groaning. It was like the place itself was screaming. Cray grabbed my shoulder, ripping me away from the seat. He flung me to the ground once more, pinning me with terrifying strength. "Enough," he snarled, his once polite veneer gone. "You think you can break the seat of the forest? You have no idea what you've done." Dizzy, I drove a knee into his midsection, loosening his grip, then slashed wildly with the knife. It raked across his face. He howled, a sound that was both human and otherworldly. His weight lifted off me for a second, and I scrambled free, stumbling behind the throne. My breath tore in ragged gasps. My entire body trembled with pain and adrenaline. Cray recovered, turning toward me with burning eyes. Dark fluid seeped from his cheek and temple. though it looked too black to be normal blood. He advanced with murder in his gaze. "I tried to make a fair bargain," he hissed. "Now you'll pay." The wind howled louder, swirling dead leaves across the clearing. The seat itself was cracked, new lines spiderwebbing through the stone from where I'd hammered it. I felt a wave of cold dread. Breaking the throne might be enough to free me, or it might unleash something far worse. Cray lunged again, and I barely dodged. My boots slipped on damp leaves, and I collapsed. He was on me in an instant, but I managed to slice at his leg. The knife cut deep, and he screamed in rage, staggering. Seizing the moment, I rolled away, pressing my back to the cracked throne. Then I plunged the blade into the largest fissure in the stone, using it like a wedge. I threw my weight against it, ignoring the agony in my injured arm. Something gave. The stone seat split with a deafening crack. A sound like a thunderclap shook the clearing. I was thrown backward, head striking the ground. My vision swam. For a second, everything went black. When I came to, the air was eerily still. Splinters of stone lay around me. The throne was half collapsed, a jagged piece missing. Mr. Cray's prone form sprawled near the base, unmoving. My head pounded. Slowly, painfully, I crawled to him, knife in hand. His eyes were open, staring at the sky, but he didn't blink. I braced for him to leap up or vanish, but he just lay there, mouth slightly open. Blood, or that black fluid, seeped from his wounds. Gingerly, I pressed the tip of my knife to his throat. No reaction. He was breathing, but labored. A faint rattle escaped his lips like a death rattle. The caretaker dethroned. As the last rays of sunlight vanished, I felt the forest shift again. But this time the oppression seemed to lift slightly. A breeze swept through, carrying the scent of pines and damp earth, but not that choking sense of malevolence. A wave of exhaustion threatened to drag me down. I forced myself to stay alert, searching the edges of the clearing for movement. Nothing. Just me and the shattered throne. My watch beeped suddenly, making me jump. I looked at it, 2:07 a.m. That single minute of change felt monumental. Shivering, I realized I might finally be free from the forest's time loop, but I needed to leave before something else claimed this seat. I didn't know if that was how it worked, but I wasn't about to linger. I shot one last look at Cray's broken form. He let out a ragged exhale, but didn't speak. Part of me wanted to finish him off, but a bigger part just wanted to get away. I grabbed my battered pack, ignoring how every muscle screamed in pain, and staggered out of the clearing. I found a path almost immediately, an actual, worn trail, not the labyrinthine illusions of before. The sky opened up just enough to let moonlight guide my steps. My compass was still broken, but I didn't need it. I just kept walking. To my amazement, after maybe 2 hours, real, measurable time, I spotted an old wooden sign pointing to a recognized campsite about half a mile away. My chest tightened with relief. Tar Hollow's official campground wasn't far. I made it there by dawn, stumbling in like a wounded animal. When a group of early morning campers saw me, they rushed over, concerned. I must have looked like a lunatic, bloody, half-starved, wild-eyed. They got me medical attention. I said I'd been lost, that my dog ran off. I couldn't bring myself to explain the rest. No one would believe me anyway. Over the following weeks, I recuperated in a hospital. My parents visited, my co-workers sent cards. I gave them a sanitized story. Max and I got lost. He died defending me from a wild animal. The truth was too twisted for anyone to understand. Sometimes, I still wonder if it was a fever dream. But I have the scars, both physical and mental, to remind me otherwise. And that's what happened in Tar Hollow in June of 2023. I haven't slept well since. Nightmares of blue flames, howling winds, and glowing eyes haunt me. Sometimes I wake convinced that Max is next to my bed, whimpering. Other nights I swear I see Mr. Cray standing in the corner of my room, his face half covered in dried blood, smiling too wide. I don't know if I truly ended his hold on that forest by breaking the throne, or if I only bought myself a reprieve. Part of me believes something else will eventually repair or replace the seat, and a new caretaker will rise. Evil that ancient doesn't simply die because one man chips a chunk of stone, but at least for now, I'm out. I'm alive, and I'll never return to Tar Hollow. If you ever find yourself drawn to the quiet corners of a remote forest, especially one with rumors of a devil's chair, I urge you, turn around. Go back. The peace you seek isn't worth the price you might pay. The forest can change you, or take from you more than you could ever imagine. It can steal your time, your sanity, your best friend. I learned that too late, and it cost me everything I loved. I'm Liam Carter. I'm 32 years old. And this is what happened to me in those cursed woods. 01. My name is Rachel Kerrigan. I'm 32 years old. This happened in late October of 2022, deep within Zaleski State Forest in Ohio. I wish I could say I've made peace with everything I went through there, but it's hard to pretend I've left it behind when I can still hear echoes of that place at night. I can still smell that thick rotting air, and I can still see that thing in the darkness, eyes full of a kind of hunger that doesn't belong in our world. I should say I'm not a thrill-seeking adventurer. I teach high school English in Dayton. I got the job right after finishing my teaching credentials, and I've spent the past several years trying to shape teenage minds while dealing with personal heartache. In the summer of 2022, I lost a pregnancy. A few weeks later, I lost my fiancé. He left the apartment with tearful apologies, saying he couldn't handle the weight of it all. The crater he left behind swallowed me. By the time October came, I felt like I was drifting through life. I needed a break from the city, from well-meaning friends' concerned stares, from my own suffocating sadness. I decided a few days in nature would help. I chose Zaleski State Forest for 2 reasons. I'd gone on a day hike there once in college and remembered it as beautiful, and it was large and isolated enough to give me privacy. I wanted no phone calls or social media for a few days. I loaded my little sedan with supplies and drove out with my golden retriever, Luna. Luna had been my therapy dog for 5 years, gentle, loyal, and always at my side when my thoughts got too dark. Our plan was 3 nights of backpacking, away from crowds, with just a small tent and basic gear. No music, no Netflix, no distractions. I arrived on a drizzly afternoon. I remember the sky looking bruised, clouds pressing so low it felt like they'd swallow the treetops. The parking lot was empty except for a single brown pickup truck. Leaves coated the ground, swirling in a wind that didn't quite feel like a breeze, more like the forest sighing. I grabbed my pack, slipped Luna into her harness, and walked into the trees. For an hour, I felt a strange peace. The hush of the forest gave me permission to think my own thoughts without anyone interrupting. The occasional bird call or the trickle of water from a hidden creek broke the silence. Autumn leaves in shades of gold and orange fluttered around us. Luna trotted ahead, tail wagging, sniffing everything with bright-eyed curiosity. Then came the first moment of unease. No more birds. Not even a distant crow. It was as if the entire forest had inhaled and held its breath. At the same time, the air grew still, and the silence pressed in. Luna froze in the middle of a narrow trail, ears perked, hackles raised. She lifted her nose, sniffed, then whimpered. "What's wrong, girl?" I asked. She glanced over her shoulder, then continued forward at a more nervous pace. I tried to shake off the chill. Forests have quiet pockets. It was getting close to dusk, so I assumed the birds might have roosted. I found a spot near an old logging road to set up my campsite. The trees were dense, and the ground was relatively flat. As the last dim glow of the sun filtered through the treetops, I assembled my small tent, blew up my sleeping pad, and fed Luna. After that, I gathered some tinder and tried to start a campfire in the ring of stones a previous camper had left. The fire crackled for a few minutes, just enough for me to relax a little. Then it sputtered out. I tried again, using the same tinder, the same technique, same everything, and it died just as quickly, 3 times. On the 4th attempt, the flames held, and I felt a surge of relief. I laughed a little at my own nerves. That night, I made freeze-dried pasta, gave Luna a rub behind the ears, and tried reading by flashlight. But I couldn't focus. I had this nagging feeling that I was being watched. Normally, that's just the paranoia of being alone in the woods, but I was used to camping. I'd never felt anything quite like it. My heart hammered, adrenaline spiking at the slightest rustling in the leaves. Luna usually snuggled up at my side, but she stayed on her feet, staring into the shadows. I told myself, "Relax, Rachel. It's your mind playing tricks." I brushed my teeth, crawled into the tent, zipped it up, and tried to sleep. I couldn't have slept more than an hour when I jolted awake, my flashlight still in my hand. Luna was whining at the tent door. The forest around us was so quiet that my own breathing sounded deafening. Then I heard something, a faint noise like a moan or a cry in the distance. My stomach clenched. Part of me reasoned it could be a fox's screech. They sometimes sound eerily human. I was exhausted and spooked, so I just muttered something to Luna, massaged her ears to calm her, and eventually dozed off again. The next morning, the entire forest was draped in a thick fog. I crawled out of the tent to a damp chill. Autumn dew coated everything. My phone was on 20% battery, which was odd because it had been on airplane mode. The weather app refused to load. I shrugged. It's not like I planned on using it much anyway. I brewed a quick cup of instant coffee. My gaze kept drifting back to the twisted branches overhead. Even in daylight, there was this sense of heaviness. My plan for the day was to hike deeper into the forest, toward a loop that circled back to the car. I was expecting about 7 miles, which should have been no trouble. I had a well-marked topographical map and a handheld GPS device as a backup. Luna and I set off. Within an hour, the battery in the GPS died, which was frustrating but not panic-worthy. I had the map after all. But as we kept walking, the trails seemed off. A spur that should have been to the northeast was heading southwest instead, or so it felt. At midday, we came across the strangest thing. A massive pine log rotted out, full of mushrooms, with a particular pattern of moss along its side. I could have sworn I saw that exact same log hours earlier, but from the map, that should have been impossible. Yet, there it was. I even found a partial footprint I recognized as my own from the day before. Okay, no big deal, I told myself, though my heart was racing. We just got turned around. I decided to press on, determined to find the next blaze or marker. That's when I ran into Benji and Sienna Monroe. They were standing near a cluster of birch trees, both looking at a rumpled map. They jumped when I called out a greeting. Benji was tall, with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap. Sienna was shorter, with curly dark hair and a pinched, anxious expression. They told me they were from Columbus, trying to do a weekend camping trip to reconnect. Their marriage, they admitted, was on the rocks. Benji joked that it wasn't going well if they were lost in the middle of nowhere. We exchanged confusion about the malfunctioning trails, the weird quiet. They, too, heard a strange moan last night, but wrote it off as an animal. I felt slightly relieved that I wasn't the only one spooked. We decided to hike together and share resources. Luna sniffed them warily, as though she wasn't fully sure if they were trustworthy, but after a few moments, she let Sienna pat her head. We spent the rest of that afternoon wandering in circles. The trail markers were absent or overgrown. My phone's battery, which had been at 17%, was suddenly at 5. Sienna said their phones had died outright the previous night. Benji tried to reassure us that once we found a ridgeline, we'd be able to orient ourselves. But the deeper we went, the flatter the forest seemed to become. By late afternoon, we gave up and made camp. We found a small clearing by a trickling creek, flanked by tall ash trees. Sienna told me they'd lost half their food. Some of it had molded overnight, which made no sense since it was sealed in Tupperware. She showed me the bread and jerky, now covered with spots of greenish-gray rot. I felt a wave of unease. I offered them some of my rations. We set up both of our tents, gathered wood, and tried to build a fire. Just like the night before, it was frustrating. Sparks caught, but the flame died out as though the wood was damp. Eventually, we got it going, but the smoke had a pungent smell, almost like burning plastic. All this strangeness weighed on us. The forest's hush deepened, and the fog lingered, even though it should have burned off by mid-morning. We were trying to chat, keep morale up, small talk about our jobs, our families. But the conversation kept veering into uneasy silence. Luna lay on her side, ears twitching, gaze flicking around. That night was worse. At around midnight, I woke to a faint light flickering outside my tent. I peeked out. Sienna was standing about 30 feet away, barefoot in the wet leaves, her face tipped toward the sky. I called her name softly. She kept humming a tuneless melody, swaying as though listening to something I couldn't hear. I unzipped the tent and stepped out, the cold earth numbing my feet. "Sienna?" She didn't react. Her nightshirt was soaked with dew, her hair plastered to her face. Finally, she turned her head and looked at me. The eyes I met weren't quite focused. They looked right through me. I tried to guide her back. She stared at me for a moment, then blinked, disoriented. "Rachel, what are you doing outside?" "What am I?" "Sienna, you're the one who left your tent." She looked around in confusion, then at her bare feet. I don't remember," she whispered. Did I sleepwalk?" Her breathing turned rapid, almost hyperventilating, as though she'd realized how bizarre the situation was. I helped her back to her tent, where Benji lay snoring away. Sienna insisted she'd be fine and apologized. Still shaky, I returned to my own tent and tried to settle in. At dawn, I woke up shivering. My sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside, but I was still in it, curled in a fetal position. It was as if my bag had been opened around me carefully. My heart slammed in my chest. Luna sat at my feet, whining softly. I told myself I must have done it in my sleep, but that didn't make sense. Outside, Benji was pacing, arms folded. He said Sienna had insisted she never got out of her tent. He also said someone had rifled through their backpacks. The food we'd set aside was missing. As we rummaged around, trying to figure out what happened, we discovered some of the missing items scattered by a stump, partially eaten, like an animal had torn through them, except there were no teeth marks. It looked more like the food had decayed on contact. At some point in the morning, I noticed the strangest sight. Luna was chewing on something black and stringy. Startled, I told her to drop it. She spat out a handful of black feathers. I looked around for any sign of a crow or raven, but found none. The ground was strangely undisturbed. I had no idea how she'd found them. We decided enough was enough. The plan was to find a route out that day, maybe bushwhack if we had to. None of us had good phone batteries, but We could try heading west, following the sun's trajectory to eventually hit the main road. We hiked for hours. The forest thickened, tangles of brambles and knots of roots so dense we had to hack our way around. My sense of direction flipped so many times I felt dizzy. Benji was trying to lead, but he kept pausing, turning the map around, then turning it back. Sienna clutched his arm, her lips thin and white. Luna started limping as though her paw pads were raw. Then, near dusk, we stumbled into a clearing that had a ring of stones, the same stones we'd used for the campfire the night before. I recognized the pattern of ashes, even the soggy wood we'd left behind. We had somehow gone in a massive circle despite aiming a different direction every time. That's when I felt the first rush of genuine terror. This forest was doing something. The normal laws of orientation weren't applying. Benji, who'd been trying to keep his bravado, sank to his knees and cursed under his breath. Sienna began to cry softly. I tried to comfort them, but inside I was unraveling. As we set up camp again in that too familiar clearing, a sense of dread settled into my bones. The sun went down, and we huddled around a fire we barely managed to coax to life. Luna stayed very close to me. I noticed her trembling. A little after dark, Benji volunteered to gather more firewood. He trudged off into the trees, carrying a small hatchet and a flashlight. Sienna and I sat by the fire, silent. My mind raced with possible explanations. Could we have some kind of gas leak causing hallucinations? Could the forest just be that disorienting? Was it mass panic? Time passed. Sienna watched the darkness for any sign of her husband's flashlight. 20 minutes turned into an hour. I considered grabbing Luna and going after him, but I remembered how easily I'd gotten lost. Sienna was just about to start screaming his name when he appeared at the edge of camp. He walked into the firelight, gaze fixed on us. I almost didn't recognize him. Something about his face was off. The way his eyes locked onto me first, not Sienna. There was too much white showing around his irises, and his smile was too broad, as though forced. "Benji, where the hell were you?" Sienna said, half whisper, half shout. He paused, looked at his hands, as if confused by the hatchet he held. "Firewood," he murmured. Then he set the hatchet down, no wood with it, took a seat by the fire and stared at the flames. After a long silence, he said, "We have to burn something to keep it away." "Keep what away?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Sienna. "You remember that time at the beach house?" he asked, voice too soft. She blinked. "Benji, what? We never had a beach house. My family had a lake house, but you've never been there." He stared at her blankly. I noticed a blackish smudge on his neck, like soot or bruising. That's when Luna started to growl. Low, rumbling, primal. She normally adored people, but at that moment she was glaring at Benji with her teeth bared. He turned to me with that same unnatural smile. "She won't bark. She's a good dog, right?" I swallowed. "Benji, are you okay?" He tilted his head like a curious animal. "She won't bark," he repeated. Then he laughed, though no humor showed in his eyes. Sienna begged him to talk sense. He made a lazy gesture toward the forest as if to wave away her concern. That's when I noticed he'd dropped his flashlight somewhere. When we asked him about it, he barely seemed to understand the question. We tried to get him to eat something, but he just stared at the fire. Sienna whispered to me, "He's not acting right. I want to leave now. I don't care if it's dark." I felt torn. In the flickering light, Sienna looked drained and terrified, while Benji looked like a stranger. Finally, we decided to wait until morning. Wandering in pitch-black conditions was too risky. Sienna coaxed Benji into their tent, though his movements were stiff, as if every joint ached. I remained by the fire, stoking it, trying to keep my eyes open. I think I dozed at some point because I nearly toppled forward onto the flames. Luna whined and nudged me. I took that as a sign to get some sleep, so I crawled into my tent, letting the fire burn down to embers. That night, I dreamt of a pale figure wandering among the trees, mouth open in a silent scream, black hair rising around her head like a cloud. Even in sleep, I felt the panic clawing at my throat. I tried to wake up, but in the dream I couldn't move. When morning finally came, I opened my eyes to find my sleeping bag unzipped again. Luna was lying across my legs, rigid and anxious. My neck hurt from the tension. I crawled out of the tent and found that the campsite was quiet, the fire cold. Benji and Sienna's tent was empty. Their backpacks, or what was left of them, had been upended. Food wrappers lay strewn around in a dark, wet pile. It stank of rot. My gut twisted. Then I saw Sienna's footprints leading away from camp, deeper into the woods. Another set of footprints walked alongside hers, deeper and heavier. I followed them a short distance, calling their names. Sienna? Benji? I found them not far from camp, near a tree that had snapped in half. Sienna was on the ground, whimpering, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Benji was crouched beside her, his hands on her ankle. She was holding in a scream, lips drawn back, sweat pouring down her face. Her foot was bent at a sickening angle, the ankle swollen and discolored. "Benji!" I shouted, rushing over. "What happened?" He let go of her and stood. There was a vacant expression on his face, like he didn't recognize me at all. Sienna grasped my leg and begged me to help. She said, "He pushed me. He grabbed me and twisted my ankle. I don't know why. He wasn't talking, just dragging me." My hands shook. I tried to figure out if her ankle was broken, but even the lightest touch made her howl. Behind me, Benji just stared off into the forest. "We have to get her back to camp," I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll figure out a way to make a splint." He turned his head slowly toward me. "She won't scream," he muttered, echoing his comment from before. Then he laughed. That laugh shattered my composure. Fear made my hands tremble, but I forced myself to help Sienna up, half carrying her toward the tents. Benji followed, silent, with that same odd smile. It took an hour to splint Sienna's ankle with a piece of plastic from a broken backpack frame, plus some cord. She cried in pain, but kept repeating, "He's not my husband. This isn't him." Benji just watched. Luna growled whenever he came too close. He eventually went to sit on a log, rocking back and forth. I glanced at his face. His pupils were huge, nearly swallowing the color of his irises. Something like blackness ringed his nostrils. Mid-morning, the forest itself seemed darker, as if storm clouds had rolled in, but the air felt stagnant. Then I heard the scream. It was a high, keening wail that made my teeth ache. The sound tore through the campsite like a physical force. Luna bolted upright, hackles raised, and whined. At the edge of the clearing, I saw her. A figure in a pale dress, floating over the leaves, hair swirling around her head. Her mouth was wide open, but the scream felt everywhere at once, not just coming from her. Even from that distance, her eyes were black, void-like. "Oh, God," Sienna whimpered. "What is that?" Benji's face twisted into a grin. He stood and walked toward the figure. "It's Morla," he said in a voice that didn't sound like him at all. I'd never heard him use that name before. I felt paralyzed as the figure drew closer. The banshee, there was no other word for her, hovered near the tree line, writhing like a body submerged in water. She reached out with one thin hand, beckoning. Then she vanished, as if she'd never been there. but the scream lingered in our heads. Luna barked and rushed toward the spot, but she stopped short, trembling. Then she spun around, tail between her legs, and darted back to me. Sienna was gasping for air, tears coursing down her cheeks. "I want to leave," she croaked. "I don't care where, just get me out." I decided we had to move. We couldn't just sit there. I started packing up my gear as fast as possible, ignoring how worthless the map and GPS had become. We'd just head west, or where we believed west was, until we found a road. Benji did nothing to help. He watched me scramble around, a faint, glassy-eyed smile still tugging at his lips. When I told him to assist Sienna, he just chuckled. I had to support her by draping her arm over my shoulder, which meant my ability to carry gear was limited. That left Luna to trot behind me, but she kept whimpering, unsettled by Benji's presence. The five of us, though calling Benji part of our group felt wrong, pushed into the forest. We walked for hours. It felt like days. The skies shifted from dull gray to a deeper gloom, and the sun never fully broke through. I stumbled over roots and nearly dropped Sienna multiple times. My arms and back burned from the weight of her. Benji led for a while, but he did so without a word. At one point, he turned around to look at me, and I could see he'd been crying black tears, thin rivulets staining his cheeks. Or maybe it was mud or some vile discharge from his eyes. I was too horrified to say anything. Eventually, we reached a steep slope that led down to a wide ravine. I thought if we could cross it, we might find a road. We slid down, Sienna gritting her teeth at every bump. At the bottom, I smelled stagnant water. A half-dry creek bed snaked through. We picked our way along the edge, stepping on rocks that sank into mud. There, Luna let out a sudden snarl, something I'd rarely heard her do. She lunged at Benji. If I hadn't grabbed her collar, she would have bitten him. Benji stared at the dog, his lips curling back. For a flash, I thought I saw a swirl of shadows behind his eyes, like something was inside him, peering out. Then he looked away, chuckling under his breath. Luna, still growling, backed off. After an hour of trudging, we found a patch of higher ground to rest. Sienna was trembling and sweating. Her ankle had swollen to nearly twice its normal size. I gave her some water and the last of my Advil. She choked on a sob. "It hurts so bad." I felt torn between wanting to console her and wanting to keep moving. A part of me whispered that we might not survive another night, but we needed a break, so we settled down for a few minutes. Benji stood at the edge of the clearing, scanning the trees. He mumbled something about, "She's here, she's always here." I had no idea what or who he meant. Then I heard it again, that mind-shattering scream. This time it seemed to come from inside my skull, not my ears. I clutched my head, wincing. Sienna screamed too, her own voice nearly lost in the banshee's wail. A figure flickered between the trees. Morla. She glided closer, and for the first time I saw her face in detail. Pale skin, black eyes, mouth stretched open in an O of agony or ecstasy I couldn't decide. Her hair billowed as though underwater, and for a moment I swore I saw shapes trapped in it, silhouettes of contorted bodies. Benji lurched forward, arms outstretched. "Take me," he muttered. "I'm yours." I grabbed Sienna's hand and tried to pull her to her feet, but she couldn't stand. Luna barked wildly, fear making her frantic. Morla's presence felt like a vacuum, sucking the warmth and hope out of the world. My limbs grew cold. As Benji reached Morla, she raised one ethereal hand and lightly touched his chest. He stiffened, letting out a low guttural cry. Then she smiled. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed to his knees. Morla disappeared, leaving Benji gasping like a fish on land. For a moment, all was quiet. Then Benji started to laugh, a horrible, choking sound that made Sienna recoil. He turned around, and I saw blackness dripping from the corner of his mouth. I couldn't think. Fear scrambled all logic in my brain. I just wanted to run. But Sienna needed me. I stooped, forced my arms under hers, and tried to drag her away. Luna barked at Benji, who was shuffling forward. Then, in a flash of movement, he lunged for Luna. I screamed at him to stop, but he grabbed her collar, twisted it tight. Luna yelped, scratching and thrashing, but Benji had an inhuman strength. He wrapped an arm around her neck and jerked. There was a sickening snap that reverberated through my skull. I froze, a wave of cold horror flooding me. Luna dropped to the ground motionless. I found myself screaming, my eyes burning with tears. No, 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 no. Sienna let out a terrified sob. Benji stared at the dog's body with mild curiosity, as if he was examining a broken toy. Grief crashed over me, and all rational thought fled. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed the hatchet that hung from Benji's belt, and swung it at him, more out of instinct than any real aim. He tried to dodge, but I caught his shoulder. A wet, sickening thud. He stumbled back, blackish fluid staining his shirt. He looked at me as if I'd broken some sacred rule. Then he hissed, revealing teeth that weren't quite normal anymore. Sharper, or maybe I was too crazed to see clearly. My mind swam with rage and horror. He lunged. I swung again blindly, tears streaming down my face. The hatchet sliced into his torso. He let out a guttural groan and fell to his knees. I staggered back, panting, the hatchet in my trembling hand. My gaze flicked to Luna's lifeless form. A wave of anguish cut through me so sharply I almost collapsed, but Sienna's soft cry pulled me out of it. "Help me," she whimpered. I stumbled toward her. She was shaking all over, tears mixing with mud on her cheeks. Benji lay on the ground, black fluid spreading around him. But as I watched, it looked less like blood and more like pitch or tar seeping into the soil. He tried to stand, but his body twitched and jerked oddly, like a marionette with the tangled strings. Rachel?" he rasped, in a voice that sounded wet and gurgly. Then a bright, mocking grin split his face. "Come back." Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. I ignored him and pulled Sienna's arm around my shoulder, forcing her to hobble with me away from the ravine, away from the body of the dog I loved more than anything. My cheeks were on fire, my mind reeling with the trauma of what I'd just witnessed. We moved through the woods as quickly as we could, but it wasn't fast. Every jolt sent a shock of pain through Sienna's ankle, and she sobbed with each step. My throat felt like it was full of knives, raw from crying and screaming. I had no sense of time, no clue if it was still morning or afternoon. The sky overhead was a heavy slate gray. I kept glancing behind us, half expecting to see Benji staggering after us, or Morla drifting between the trunks. We eventually found another small clearing. Sienna's face was pale, her eyes half-lidded. She was going into shock. I eased her to the ground. We had no more water left, no more food. At that point, I wasn't sure if we'd survive another day. "Sienna, I'll try to find help," I managed to say, voice cracking. She shook her head. "Don't leave me alone," she whispered. "Please." I felt torn. But if I stayed with her, we'd both die. Or worse. The forest didn't follow normal rules, but maybe if I kept going, I'd find a road or a ranger station. My mind was in chaos, but I had to decide quickly. "Sienna, do you think you can last a few hours on your own?" She stared at me, tears brimming. "I don't know." I offered her the hatchet. She gripped it with shaking hands. If Benji comes, use this." She nodded. "Oh, okay." I felt like a monster for even suggesting I leave her there, but I saw no other option. She had zero mobility, and I was our only chance. So I staggered up, ignoring the trembling in my legs, and told her I'd come back for her as soon as I found help. I walked into the trees. My entire body shook with adrenaline and sorrow. The image of Luna's death replayed in my head over and over. I fought the urge to curl up and sob until I couldn't breathe. The forest seemed more twisted than ever, the trees leaning at odd angles, the ground spongy underfoot. The air smelled of decay. I pressed on, forcing myself to put one foot in front of the other. My mind drifted to Morla, the silent, screaming woman. She'd done something to Benji, turned him into that thing. At some point, the forest opened onto a narrow dirt road. Relief burst inside me. I coughed out a ragged laugh. A car might come by, a game warden, maybe. I looked both ways. Nothing but trees in either direction. But a road meant civilization eventually. I turned right, hoping it would lead toward the parking lot where my car was. My sense of direction was shot, but I had to try. As I walked, my head pounded. My hands and arms were filthy, scratched from brambles. Then, from behind me, a voice called my name. "Rachel! Hey, you!" I whirled around. A man in a ranger's uniform jogged toward me. He looked real, tall, with a clean-shaven face and a genuine expression of concern. I felt my knees go weak. "Help us," I croaked. "My friend, she's hurt, and there's—" I couldn't form coherent sentences. The man, who introduced himself as Ranger Sullivan, helped me to the side of the road, gave me water from his canteen. It tasted metallic, but I was too thirsty to care. He listened to my rambling story about Sienna, about a forest that defied all logic. I left out the more supernatural details. Who would believe me? I told him there was a man who attacked us. An accident. Dog killed. We needed medical help. He nodded gravely. "We'll get your friend. Where is she?" I motioned in the direction I'd come from, though I wasn't sure exactly how to retrace my steps. The forest was a maze. "She's maybe a mile from the road. She can't walk." He helped me to his truck, parked a short distance away. I climbed inside, exhaustion threatening to pull me under. We drove for a minute, headlights illuminating the narrow road. He kept glancing at me. "You said you got lost out here. How long have you been in Zaleski?" he asked. 3 days, I muttered, though it felt like a lifetime. Suddenly I froze. The man was wearing a ranger's uniform, but the patch on his sleeve was partially torn, the letters faded. There was a slight odor in the cab, like mildew and something else, something sour. I started to ask about it, but he cut me off. "We're just about to a trail that might lead us to your friend." My heart hammered. My instincts screamed. Something wasn't right, but I was so desperate for help. We turned down a small side path barely wide enough for the truck. I clutched the armrest. Then the headlights flickered. The entire truck lurched. "Damn batteries acting up," he muttered, punching the dashboard. The lights came back on. Ranger Sullivan's face looked wrong for just a fraction of a second. His eyes seemed too big, his smile too wide. I blinked, and he was normal again, focusing on the dirt path. "Stop," I whispered. "Let me out." He gave me a sidelong glance. "Why would we stop? We've got to get your friend." But every hair on my neck was standing up. I flung the door open, unbuckled, and jumped out, stumbling onto the road. He slammed on the brakes, cursed, and jumped out after me. I scrambled away, ignoring the pain in my legs. I realized I might be leaving Sienna behind, but something was deeply sinister here. "Come back!" Sullivan yelled. I looked over my shoulder. He was standing by the open truck door, but his shape flickered in the headlights like static on a screen. Then he twisted, his body contorting into a silhouette with arms that stretched too long. I screamed, turning to run blindly into the woods again. Branches whipped at my face, Roots snagged my feet, but I kept running. My lungs burned. I prayed that the real world was out there somewhere, that I could find a real ranger or a real hiker or a real anything. Eventually, I stumbled onto another old logging road. At least, I thought it was old. The ground had wheel ruts, partially grown over with weeds. I slowed my pace, gulping air. Rachel. That voice. A woman's voice, but not Sienna's. It was gentle, half a whisper. I whirled around. Nobody. The forest was empty. The sky was so dark it felt like twilight even though it should have been midday. Then I felt a breath on my neck, though no one was there. I heard faint moans, like someone in pain. I recognized Sienna's voice. My stomach lurched. She needed me. I tried to follow the sound, but every time I thought I was close, it faded. At one point, I found myself in a small clearing strewn with old, rusted equipment, chains, broken wheelbarrows. My phone beeped, startling me. The screen lit up at 2% battery, then died again. That beep was the last tether I had to normalcy. Time got fuzzy. I walked, stumbling, nauseous with fear. The forest air weighed me down, each breath thick as syrup. Then, out of nowhere, I found an actual paved forest road, the one we typically drive to get to the state park campgrounds. My mind reeled. I recognized a sign that said, Zaleski State Forest, Public Hunting Area. I followed that road. Eventually, a battered SUV approached, headlights slicing through the gloom. I waved my arms, tears streaming down my face. The driver, a middle-aged hiker named Don, was wary, but he let me in after seeing my frantic desperation. I babbled about Sienna, about how we needed to call search and rescue. Don dialed 911 on his phone. Miraculously, he had just enough signal to get through, though he had to repeat the location a few times. An hour later, or maybe it was longer, time kept slipping, I was in the back of an ambulance. I told them everything, how a man attacked us, how Sienna was still out there. They asked about her last known location, and I tried to be specific, but it was all jumbled. We drove up and down roads, searching for an access point. Eventually, official rangers and local volunteers joined the search. They combed the woods for hours, but night came, and they had to call it off. I refused to leave the command post near the edge of the forest. I sobbed, begging them to keep looking. The next morning, they tried again. They found no sign of Sienna or Benji or a campsite in the area I described. The one weird thing they did find was an abandoned campsite about 2 miles from the main road, where the ground had distinct signs of rot and scorch marks. But no bodies, no tents, nothing that matched my story. I spent days in the local hospital, treated for dehydration and shock. The local sheriff interviewed me multiple times. I gave them my fiance's number, explained my background, hoping they'd believe me. They looked. They found my car in the forest parking lot, which validated that part of my story. But they still seemed skeptical that I'd witnessed murders or anything supernatural. A search for Sienna and Benji Monroe turned up no missing person reports. They couldn't verify their existence. I felt like I was going insane. Eventually, I returned to Dayton, haunted by the memory of Luna's final yelp. I couldn't even bring myself to talk to my close friends. I tried journaling, pouring out every detail, but the nightmares kept coming. Morla's face floated in my dreams, that mouth wide in a scream that was silent yet thunderous in my mind. A few weeks later, a local reporter came across the story. She interviewed me briefly, never published anything conclusive. She mentioned that Zaleski Forest has a history of strange disappearances. None of it brought me peace. The final blow came when I returned to my apartment and found Luna's leash in the living room. I know I left it behind in the forest. I remember seeing it on the ground, covered in her blood. Yet, here it was, coiled on the coffee table, wet, leaves clinging to it. I burned it in a panic, sobbing the entire time. At night, I hear a scream in my dreams, the same unearthly wail. I see the dog I failed to protect. I see Sienna's face twisted in terror. I see Benji's grin, black tears rolling down his cheeks. And behind it all, the shape of Morla, with her swirling hair and endless black eyes. She hovers at the edge of my vision, waiting. Sometimes, I think I hear footsteps outside my bedroom window, or see a flicker of a white gown just out of sight. Sometimes, I swear the clock on my wall ticks backward for a second. I'll look again, and it's normal. But the feeling lingers. I wish this story had a tidy ending, with a rescue or a final confrontation that banished the evil from Zaleski. But I can't offer that. Zaleski is still out there, vast and silent. Sienna might still be lying somewhere under the trees, or maybe she escaped, or maybe she was claimed by whatever Morla truly is. As for me, I'm left with nightmares, memories that no one believes, and guilt that tears at my heart. I sometimes wonder if I escaped at all, or if part of me is still lost in those twisting trails where time loops and screams echo. Maybe one day Morla will come for me in person, drifting through the locked doors of my home. I don't know which possibility is worse, that she's already inside, or that she's still out there waiting for her chance to slip back into my life. All I can do is try to continue. I go to work, I see my therapist, I take deep, trembling breaths whenever I feel panic creeping in. But whenever I close my eyes at night, I see that forest. I see that moment when everything around me felt like it had a pulse, beating in time with a scream that didn't belong in this world. And I know that as much as I want to leave it behind, Zaleski still owns a piece of me, wrapped in the hush of haunted trees. I've accepted one truth. Sometimes there's no closure. Sometimes the forest doesn't give you back your loved ones, your peace of mind, or even your sanity. It just leaves you with an echo, a reminder. I live with that echo every day. 01. My name is Nate Halberd. I was 32 years old when this happened. It was mid-October of 2022, the time of year when the leaves in Ohio are at their brightest, and the air turns sharp with the promise of coming frosts. If I sound distant or haunted, it's because I am. Even now, I can't recount these events without feeling a shudder in my bones, like a cold hand gripping my insides. I used to think that writing everything down might exorcise whatever is left in me, but I'm no longer so sure. I write this because it's the only way I can remain somewhat sane. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I need to record every detail. I've lived in Ohio most of my life, working as a school teacher, 5th grade English mainly. I loved kids and books and quiet afternoons. But last year, the school board granted me a sabbatical so I could finish a project I'd proposed, writing a horror novel based on old Appalachian legends and ghost stories. I had this ambitious plan to spend 5 days in Zaleski State Forest. People said it was peaceful. The area around the abandoned Moonville Tunnel drew me in with its local lore, whispers of ghosts, devils, and strange phenomena. Ghost towns fascinate me, probably because they hold so many secrets, and I wanted atmosphere. I got it, all right, just not in the way I ever imagined. I brought my German Shepherd, Bear, along. Bear was my rock. 5 years old, large, loyal, well-trained. He'd accompanied me on multiple camping trips before, and I trusted him to keep me safe. The plan was simple. Hike in about 3 miles from the nearest back road, set up a base camp near the old railway tracks, gather inspiration during the day by exploring the area, then write all evening by the campfire. I wanted to come home with a rough draft of my first horror novel, a sense of pride, and maybe a few stories to tell my students someday about how I found creative magic in the hush of the forest. But the hush of that forest proved darker than any imagination of mine. Today, whenever I see a flicker of red light or breathe in the smell of wet leaves, I'm forced to remember what happened out there. I arrived around noon on a Friday. The drive from Columbus took just over an hour, but the last few miles were on rutted back roads that seemed to wind endlessly. Sunlight trickled through the canopy overhead as I parked the truck. Bear hopped out, sniffing the air. He seemed excited. A typical dog on a new adventure. I found myself grinning at his boundless energy. I had no way of knowing it would be the last time I'd see Bear so carefree. We started the hike in good spirits. The forest was quiet except for the crunch of leaves underfoot and Bear's nails tapping on fallen branches. Not many tourists come this far into Zaleski in mid-October. I remember a mild chill in the air, but nothing alarming. The only oddity was a layer of fog in the distance, hugging the lower valleys, even though it was midday. I shrugged it off as some weather quirk. My plan took us along a lightly marked trail that was supposed to connect with a disused railway bed near the old Moonville Tunnel. By the time I found a spot to set up camp, the sun hung low in the sky. Somehow, hours had vanished without me noticing. It was as though I'd lost track of time in a dream, but I wasn't alarmed yet. I staked my small tent on a patch of level ground. An old, crumbling stone foundation lay maybe 100 yards away, swallowed by ivy. Perfect. It lent the place a certain historic eeriness I could mine for my writing. I gathered kindling, built a fire pit, and set out some water for Bear. I was excited to get the camp all cozy before dark. My phone read 5 p.m. My phone was fully charged, but the signal was spotty. That was expected. Once everything was in place, I fed Bear, then sat on a collapsible chair and tried to type notes on my phone's writing app. I managed maybe 2 sentences of an opening scene for my novel, some cliched lines about the hush of a haunted forest, before I realized my phone was shutting off on its own. Annoyed, I tapped the power button. It had 80% battery. Strange, but I rebooted it. A minute later, it went dark again. "All right, I get it," I mumbled. "You want me to write the old-fashioned way." I had a notebook in my pack, so I switched to scribbling notes there instead. The first night was quiet, if unnerving. A dense fog rolled in around 3 in the morning, so thick it felt like a presence. My tent was zipped. Bear curled at my feet, but I heard him growling from time to time in the dark. Whenever I flicked on my flashlight, he'd stop, as though he were ashamed or uncertain. I listened hard, but the forest itself sounded normal. Night insects chirping, wind rustling leaves, a branch cracking somewhere. Still, I had the sense that something was out there, watching. It was silly, I told myself, part of the reason I'd come in the first place, to spook myself into writing better horror. Eventually, my exhaustion won, and I slept. The next day started with promise. I felt more rested than I expected. Bear, bright-eyed and restless, pawed at the tent door. I took him out for a quick walk, boiled water for coffee on my small camp stove, and then planned to explore the old Moonville Tunnel. I packed a day's worth of supplies in my backpack: first aid kit, water, a little food, an external battery for my phone, still refusing to hold charge, a flashlight, my notebook, and my hunting knife. Bear kept wagging his tail, sniffing everything. We set off down the disused railway tracks to find the tunnel. The route was easy enough. Just follow the broken tracks, let Bear lead. After a mile, the forest parted, and we were standing at the mouth of Moonville Tunnel. Stone walls, graffiti, and the air inside unbelievably cold, like walking into a meat locker. fog clung around the edges. I'd read about this place being haunted by the ghost of a brakeman who died on the tracks, or a miner's widow searching for her lost child. Eerie stories, but I didn't see anything. Yet. Bear sniffed the entrance, then whined a little. I patted his head and clicked on my flashlight. The graffiti was typical. Hearts, names, cryptic messages. One piece read, "He's coming." Run. Another said, "Old Red claims all." Odd. I recognized the phrase "Old Red" from local legends about a demon or devil that haunted the area. Supposedly, if you stood in the tunnel at midnight and called out, "Old Red, come forth," you'd see two glowing red eyes. I rolled my eyes at the melodrama and pressed forward. Inside, my breath came out in clouds. The echoes were strange. Each footstep came back delayed, like the tunnel was longer than it looked. I couldn't help checking over my shoulder. Bear stayed close, tension rippling through him. I forced myself to imagine a ghostly scene. Exactly what I'd come here for. Fear can be a writer's best friend, right? Halfway through, my phone, on its external battery, flared to life. And then it died again. Then came back, flickering an LED glow like a malfunctioning strobe. Bear made a low sound in his throat, hackles raised. I felt goosebumps tingle on my arms. A faint breeze sighed through the tunnel, carrying the smell of rotting leaves and something like sulfur. I reached the far side with relief. There were more remnants of the old rail line beyond. A collapsed platform, half-buried rail ties. Bear wanted to continue, but I had enough exploring. I needed to get back and start writing while the impressions were fresh. The return walk felt even colder, and those graffiti warnings looked freshly painted somehow, the paint damp as though just sprayed on. We emerged into the daylight. It was so bright I squinted, momentarily disoriented. My watch said it should be close to noon, but the sun was already drifting past its zenith. Confused, I tried to tell myself that maybe I'd lingered longer in the tunnel than I realized. It didn't feel like that much time had passed, though. Brushing off the uneasy feeling, I patted Bear and headed back toward camp. That evening, trouble really began. For one thing, I couldn't get a normal fire going. I arranged my tinder, struck a match, and the flame guttered out immediately. I tried again and again, dry leaves, small twigs, everything that should have caught. The flame would flicker once, then vanish as though snuffed by invisible fingers. It took me half an hour, a bottle of starter fluid, and a fierce determination to finally coax out a flame. Even then it was feeble and gave off a sullen smoke. Bear paced around whining, occasionally barking at the darkness beyond our campsite. Frustrated, I turned to my phone again. I used the external battery, turned the phone on, and checked for messages. It refused to connect. The battery icon danced up and down from 50% to 5% to 30% in seconds. Great, I thought. The phone's obviously shot. Fine. At least I had my notebook. I made do, scribbling some thoughts about the tunnel and the unsettling coldness there. The fire was so small that I could barely see my own handwriting. Night settled in fully. The wind picked up, rattling the branches overhead. My breath kept showing as faint white clouds, but it wasn't that cold out, certainly not freezing. Around 2 a.m., I finally zipped into my tent with Bear. We'd eaten some trail mix and jerky, though neither of us had much of an appetite. My watch read 2:13, and I decided to get some rest. I woke sometime later in a panic. The tent was wide open, unzipped. I sat up, heart hammering, and realized I was lying outside my sleeping bag. Bear was nowhere to be found. The air was damp and cold, the sky overcast. I fumbled for my flashlight. The inside of the tent looked normal, except the bag had been unzipped from the inside as if I'd done it, but I had no memory of that. Shivering, I crawled out into the night. The coals in the fire pit glowed faintly. I saw movement at the edge of the firelight. Bear, hunched and staring. His ears perked when I called his name. He trotted back as though confused, letting out a short whine. Something had him spooked. I realized I was trembling just as badly. Maybe I'd sleepwalked? I'd never done that before, but there was a first time for everything. Telling myself I was fine, I coaxed Bear back into the tent. This time, I left the flashlight clipped to the tent's interior so we wouldn't be in darkness if something weird happened. I tried to calm down, breathing in and out, reciting self-help mantras like a fool. Eventually, though, I slipped into an uneasy doze, haunted by half-dreams of looming shadows and snapping twigs. Morning came slowly, if at all. When my eyes opened, the tent was lit by a pale gloom, not the bright sunlight I expected. Bear woke up too, instantly on alert, as if he sensed my tension. I stepped out and found that the forest was unusually dark. Even though my watch said 9 a.m., the sun, hidden behind thick clouds, gave almost no warmth. The day felt wrong. I decided to make coffee, but when I opened my supply bin, I discovered my beans were moldy. Just last night they'd been sealed and fresh. Now they were riddled with green fungus. Disgusted, I threw them aside and checked the rest of my supplies. My bread, cheese, and some of my dried snacks were also spoiled. My canteen smelled rancid. Bear's dog food container was fine, thank God, but that was the only silver lining. I found an unopened water bladder, tested it, and discovered it tasted metallic, almost chemical. Everything was going downhill faster than made sense. I was about to reorganize my gear when I froze. My entire tent had doubled. Right beside my original tent was an identical one, with the same brand, same color, same fraying corner near the right zipper. I rubbed my eyes in disbelief. Could someone have an identical model, right down to the defects, and set it up in the night? That made no logical sense. My heart thudded. Bear let out a low growl. I grabbed the corner of this second tent, gave it a yank. The fabric felt real. I unzipped it. Inside, a duplicate of my gear. Another backpack, same brand, same worn patches. Another bedroll, another dog bowl, cracked in the same spot. Then I saw my notebook lying in the corner. I picked it up. It was the same black cover, the same note scrawled on the inside cover. N. Halberd. Man is the measure of all things. But when I flipped the pages, the words were in some alien script, like twisted Latin or archaic runes. Symbols I couldn't read. The handwriting looked suspiciously like mine. I backpedaled, dropping the notebook. My heart hammered in my chest. Was I hallucinating? Bear barked, and I half expected the second tent to vanish if I blinked. It didn't. I backed away, stumbling, and had to force myself not to scream. "Bear, come," I whispered. He obeyed, pressing against my leg. The dog's tension was so high that I could feel him trembling. Something was very wrong. Some kind of reality warping wrong. My phone was now useless. Wouldn't turn on at all, so I couldn't call for help. Mentally, I weighed my options. Get out. I could hike back to my truck and drive away. This trip was cursed. Screw my writing project. I'd figure out some other approach. My only worry was the possibility of losing the route. The forest was big, the trails not well marked. Still, I'd found the tracks easily enough. If I followed them in the correct direction, I'd eventually hit the crossing near Raccoon Creek, then double back to the road where I'd parked. Right? I packed up my original tent, though I had no clue which was truly original, then decided to leave that cursed duplicate behind. As I stuffed everything, I heard a voice behind me. Need help? I spun around to see a man about 50 yards away, leaning on a walking stick. He wore a beat-up old baseball cap, flannel shirt, and cargo pants. His hair was grizzled, his beard short. He raised a hand in a friendly greeting, though he was close enough that I felt uneasy he'd approached without me or Bear noticing. Bear's growl intensified. "Didn't mean to startle you," he called, stepping forward. "Name's Jeb. You must be new around here." I tried to steady my voice. "Yeah, sort of. Came out to do some writing. Didn't expect to see anyone." Bear's ears flattened, and his growling turned into a throaty snarl. Jeb eyed Bear warily, then gave a disarming smile. "That's a mighty protective dog you got. Listen, I was just passing through. Thought I heard commotion. You look spooked. Anything I can do?" Part of me wanted to just spill everything about the second tent, the glitching phone, the rotting supplies, but something about Jeb's presence made me hesitate. It was as though Bear's instinctive hostility was a warning. Still, I was desperate. "I was planning to hike out," I said, forcing calm. "My phone died. Any chance I could get directions to the nearest parking lot?" Sure, Jeb said easily. "Zaleski ain't too complicated. You gotta head north about a mile before hooking east. You'll find a dirt road that meets the main route. Or you could head south if you're camped near the old rail tracks." He raised an eyebrow. "You been to that tunnel then?" "Yeah," I said. "Yesterday." Something flickered in his eyes, an amused glint. "Ah, so you heard the stories. This place is thick with them. People come seeking something, fame, thrills, who knows, you writing something about them?" My skin prickled. "Yeah, actually, but I think I've had enough. I just want to go home." Jeb nodded slowly. "Don't blame you." He hobbled over to the fire pit, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a match. He struck it on a rock, and the small flame burst bright and hot, far more intense than any match I'd ever seen. He tossed it into the cold fire pit, and in seconds the tinder flared to life, crackling almost unnaturally. "You see, sometimes these old forests need a certain coaxing," he said without a trace of sarcasm. "You might need to coax them back if you want safe passage." That odd statement set me on edge. The man was too comfortable with weirdness. Bear growled again, his hackles raised. Jeb gave a tight-lipped smile. "Dog don't like me, huh?" I wanted to stand up for Bear, say something like, "He's usually great with people." But the truth was, Bear had never acted so hostile to anyone before. "He's just spooked," I lied. Jeb shrugged. "Well, I can show you a direct way out if that's what you want. But if you're sure you want to leave, best do it soon. Nights come early around here." I tried to read his gaze. Part of me wanted to accept his help. Part of me sensed a profound danger in trusting this strange man. "I'll pack up and follow the rails," I said, more firmly than I felt. Jeb merely nodded and said, "Suit yourself, but if you change your mind, I'll be in the area. Folks around here call me Jeb, but I got other names too." He smiled, but it was a chilling expression more than a reassuring one. His eyes flicked to Bear, and for a moment I swore they glowed a faint red. I blinked. Gone. He turned and limped away into the trees. Bear let out a final snarl, but as soon as Jeb was out of sight, my dog whined and looked up at me, ears drooping. I stroked his fur, trying to calm him, and myself. We headed toward the tracks, ignoring Jeb's talk of going north, then east. The path we took was the same we'd hiked in on, I was sure of it. Yet, after an hour of walking, the forest looked subtly different. The shapes of the trees were all wrong, the hills steeper. The route twisted in ways I didn't recall. I kept telling myself maybe it's the angle or the lighting, but soon I realized my printed map was worthless. None of the contour lines matched the terrain. None of the forks led where they should. Even the railway tracks themselves seemed to dead end occasionally, forcing me to double back. Bear started to get antsy. He sniffed at the ground, let out low whines, and occasionally he'd dash a few feet ahead, then run back as if urging me to hurry. My watch said 2 p.m., but the sky looked twilight dark. The sense of being trapped in a labyrinth grew heavier with each step. After another hour of fruitless wandering, I spotted the mouth of the Moonville Tunnel again. We'd circled back. That's when the terror hit me full force. This was impossible. We'd been walking in a more or less straight line. How did we end up right back at the tunnel? The tunnel was different this time. The entrance seemed deeper, blacker. I heard a faint echo from inside, like a low moan reverberating against the damp stone. Bear whimpered, ears flat against his skull. I took a shaky breath. Maybe I could pass through the tunnel and exit on the other side, find the path from there. It was worth a shot. Stepping inside felt like plunging into an open grave. The temperature plummeted. Our footsteps rang out in crisp echoes. I shone my flashlight ahead. The graffiti was still there, but in new configurations, swirling, shifting forms. The words, "He's coming," "Run," glistened as if recently painted. A deep sense of being watched prickled the back of my neck. I tried not to look behind me. Halfway in, the flashlight flickered. Died. Darkness swallowed us. Bear snarled and then barked frantically, but it sounded muffled. I fumbled for the phone, but it was dead. I found my small wind-up flashlight and started cranking, the feeble beam revealing damp stone, drifting mist, and figures in the distance. People, or the shadows of people, their outlines uncertain. My heart hammered. I swiveled the light, but as soon as I got them in focus, they vanished. It was as if the tunnel was conjuring illusions. Then the temperature soared. My breath no longer showed. Sweat prickled my forehead. Bear's barking fell silent, replaced by a low whine. I smelled sulfur again, mixed with rotting leaves. My mind insisted the tunnel shouldn't be this long, but we walked and walked, never reaching the exit. Fear clawed at me. I could barely keep my thoughts in order. Then I saw the faint outline of an archway up ahead, the exit. I sprinted for it, Bear beside me. The second we crossed the threshold, daylight, even if it was meager, hit us like a revelation. I gasped, feeling my heart pound. Except, the clearing on the other side was not the same one we saw the day before. The ground sloped sharply. Half the trees were twisted or dead, the air stale. A looming silence lay over everything. It didn't look like Zaleski at all. For a terrifying moment, I thought we'd stepped into another dimension entirely. Bear let out a long, mournful howl. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I whirled, knife ready. Jeb stood by the tunnel entrance, giving me a sympathetic look. "You're lost," he said quietly. I glared at him. "What do you want? How are you here? Where are we?" He grinned, a slow, deliberate grin that stretched his face in an unsettling way. "You asked for inspiration, didn't you? Or did you forget?" He shook his head. "Most folks come here with big ambitions. They want a bargain. They want success. They want fortune. They don't realize the cost, always a cost." I had no idea what he was talking about. "I didn't bargain with anyone," I snapped. He chuckled. "Didn't you? You don't have to say it out loud. You came here seeking something. Meaning, perhaps? Or that big break, that perfect story. You might have read about Old Red, but you didn't believe. Well, you invited me the moment you decided to fish for nightmares in this place." My heart pounded. Bear bristled, standing protectively between us. "So, you're telling me you're Old Red?" I scoffed, but it came out shaky. He spread his arms. "Call me Jeb, Old Red, the devil, a demon. Labels are small. You, Nate Halberd, are the same man who sat by a dying campfire last night thinking, I'd give anything for the perfect story. That's enough to let me in. I flashed back to a moment by the fire. I was frustrated, anxious. Maybe I did think something like that, though not out loud. A superstitious swirl of dread curled in my gut. "Stay away," I said, brandishing my knife. It felt small, useless. Jeb, Old Red, just chuckled. "I don't need to come closer. You've already made a deal you don't understand. But if you want to get out, maybe we can negotiate the terms." "Go to hell," I spat. He flashed a grin. "I've heard that one before." With that, he faded away into the tunnel's darkness as though he'd never been there. Bear barked a few times, then quieted, confused. I was losing it. My head felt dizzy, my sense of time and location unhinged. I forced myself to breathe, to cling to logic. I still had a chance to get out. If none of the trails made sense, I'd trust the sun's position. That was nature's compass, right? But as I looked up, I realized I couldn't even see the sun, just a heavy gray swirl overhead. My watch read 3:05 p.m. If that was true, it might get dark soon. We had to move. Bear and I tramped through the twisted forest. Sometimes we found old train tracks half buried in leaves. Other times, there were strange clearings with lumps that looked like old graves. My sense of distance was all warped. I'd walk what felt like a few hundred yards, but the watch would jump ahead by an hour, or not move at all. At one point, I tried counting my steps to keep track, but the act felt futile. Late in the day, or what I assumed was late, I realized I was starving. I fished out a granola bar from a side pocket, only to find it covered in powdery mold. I cursed and tossed it. Bear's food, at least, was still sealed, so I gave him some. That left me with water, which tasted metallic and a half-broken morale. Eventually, we stumbled upon a small clearing. Exhausted, I decided I needed rest. Setting up my tent, my real one, I hoped, seemed the best idea, even though the place gave me the creeps. The wind had picked up, and the sky was turning a bruised purple, indicating nightfall was near. I quickly pitched the tent, made a ring of stones, and tried to start a fire. The matches I had left refused to catch. I used my lighter. The flame sputtered out. Panicked, I poured out the last of my starter fluid. Nothing. The wood itself was somehow resisting fire. Sighing, I crawled into my tent with Bear and zipped us inside. The final glimmer of dusk allowed me to see the surrounding area. Twisted shadows of trees formed menacing shapes. The hush was absolute, not a single insect or bird. Bear curled up at my feet, trembling occasionally. I passed the hours in a tortured half-sleep, dozing and jolting awake, each time imagining I heard whispering or footsteps. Once, I was certain I saw the silhouette of a child outside the tent. Another time, I felt sure the entire forest floor was moving, breathing. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to Bear licking my face, his urgent whine telling me something was wrong. The tent was unzipped again. My sleeping bag was open. Bear stood outside the tent flaps, hackles up, staring into the darkness. I crawled forward, squinting. The coals in the ring of stones glowed faintly red, but I hadn't even gotten a real fire going. How could there be coals? I stepped out, knife in hand. Bear prowled at my side. The silence pressed in, almost physical. My watch said 3:47 a.m. My phone lay dead at the bottom of my pack, so that was no help. "Who's there?" I tried to call, but my voice barely carried. Something crunched nearby. I turned to see a figure. My heart leapt. "Bear?" I said, blinking. But Bear was right beside me, bristling. A second bear stood a few yards away, identical in size and coloring, eyes reflecting the faint red glow of the coals. It cocked its head, tail wagging in slow arcs. My breath caught in my throat. The real bear snarled. The double's lips pulled back in an eerie imitation, revealing fangs that looked too large, too sharp. I felt a wave of nauseating horror. Slowly, the double's muzzle stretched unnaturally, eyes glowing crimson. It let out a guttural hiss, a mockery of a dog's bark. In a blink, it was gone, vanishing into the gloom. The real bear barked furiously, but we heard nothing more. By daybreak, assuming it was daybreak since the fog never really lifted, I was done. I had to leave, or I'd lose my mind. I gave Bear a portion of dog food, took a swallow of metallic water, and started walking. I didn't know what else to do. Trying to remain oriented by landmarks was impossible. The forest seemed to shift. Trails forked and rejoined in nonsensical patterns. Then, after hours of slogging, I stumbled into a clearing I recognized. My original campsite. The stone foundation, the faint ring of burned tinder. My second or third attempt to break out of this labyrinth had led me in another circle. And that's when I saw Bear, or something that looked like Bear, lying near the old stone foundation. But Bear was also at my side. The dog in front of me turned its head, ears back, gazing at me with a haunted expression. My bear barked. I blinked, and the second dog was gone. A faint echo of a bark lingered, twisting through the mist. It was too much. I fell to my knees, holding my face in my hands, tears brimming. Bear pressed against me, whining, as though trying to comfort me. I felt raw, exhausted, done. I kept hearing that voice. "You might need to coax the forest back if you want safe passage," Jeb's words. Maybe I had to do something or give up something. But what? Why me? While I was trying to compose myself, Bear bolted into the trees. "Bear!" I screamed, but he ignored me. I sprinted after him, my boots slipping on damp leaves. I followed his barks deeper into the woods, stumbling over roots and branches. The barks faded quickly. Panic fueled me. My only companion in this nightmare was gone. I was alone. I ran blindly. Twigs slapped my face, brambles tore at my clothes. Heart hammering, I tripped, fell into a small ravine. Pain shot through my ankle. I forced myself up and saw the trees parted ahead. Limping, I hobbled out into a wide clearing I'd never seen. There, in the center, was the half-collapsed mouth of an ancient mine shaft or rail deposit. Bear stood at the entrance, tail rigid. Next to him stood a shape, human but impossibly tall, with broad shoulders, charcoal gray skin, and eyes that glowed the color of embers. My mind screamed, Jeb, Old Red, the devil, some monstrous version of him. The shape placed a hand on Bear's head, then it vanished into the darkness of the shaft. Bear turned to me. I called his name, tears choking my voice. He bared his teeth in a snarl. My dog. My loyal companion. That was not Bear. Something about his eyes was off. Slowly, he padded toward me, as though sizing up prey. My heart soared in relief and dread. I extended a hand. "Bear, buddy, come on," I whispered. He lunged, jaws snapping. I barely had time to jerk away. His teeth caught my forearm, tearing a deep gash. I screamed, adrenaline spiking. He'd never done anything like this, yet here he was, eyes wild. He released my arm, circled around me, drool dripping. The look in his eyes was almost human, as though something else peered out from behind them. I fumbled for my knife. "Bear, stop!" I pleaded. Another lunge, snapping jaws grazing my thigh. In desperation, I slashed with my hunting blade. The edge caught Bear's shoulder. He yelped, but the sound was warped, half-human, full of rage. My mind was fracturing. This was my dog, my beloved companion, and yet I couldn't let him kill me. He attacked again, faster than I expected, knocking me onto my back. His weight pressed me down. I felt hot breath on my face, teeth closing around my neck. Panic surged. I stabbed blindly, tears streaming down my cheeks. The blade plunged into Bear's side. He made a noise so wrong it curdled my blood, like a man screaming from the depths of his lungs. He jerked away, staggering. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing. Bear, if it was even Bear, stood there, blood streaming from the wound. He stared at me with those unnatural eyes, swayed on his feet, then collapsed. My blade, soaked in gore, trembled in my hand. I approached, sobbing, and saw him shudder. His eyes fluttered. For an instant, he looked like my bear again, confused, in pain. I reached out, tears choking me. "Bear?" I rasped. His eyes flicked closed. He exhaled once, then went limp. A hush fell over the clearing. I knelt there, hands shaking violently, staring at his body. My sweet dog. I'd had him since he was a puppy. Now he lay lifeless in front of me, killed by my own hand. I was screaming inside, the sound silent in my throat. I don't know how long I stayed like that. The sky overhead dimmed further, the gloom pressing in. Finally, I forced myself up. My arm was bleeding badly. I needed to dress the wound. I rifled in my pack for bandages, tears still streaking my cheeks. I felt hollow, as though I'd just murdered part of my own soul. Eventually, in a ragged haze, I realized I couldn't leave Bear there. I tried to lift him, but my injured ankle and the dog's size made it nearly impossible. My bandaged arm throbbed. Exhaustion and heartbreak overwhelmed me. I settled for covering him with branches and leaves, a desperate approximation of a burial. I whispered goodbye. Then I staggered away, not knowing where I was going. My mind was a raw swirl of trauma and dread. Everything after that is fragmented in my memory. I recall stumbling through the woods, hearing disembodied voices. I'm certain I saw my own face, rotting, hanging from a tree, eyes open and blinking. Maybe it was a hallucination. I remember glimpses of Jeb leaning against a trunk, smirking, but whenever I lunged for him, he vanished. Sometimes the sun was overhead, but my watch would say midnight. Other times it was a pitch black, but my watch read 4 p.m. In one horrifying sequence, I found myself standing inside the Moonville tunnel again, the walls lit by an otherworldly red glow. Mist curled at my ankles. On the walls, runic symbols formed the shape of a monstrous horned figure. I heard chanting, my own voice chanting, repeating words I didn't understand. I blacked out, and when I came to, I was outside, leaning against the tunnel's stones, shivering in the cold. The forest was silent. Finally, at the edge of delirium, I crawled up a slope and onto a gravel road. My body ached, my arm wound swollen. Blood matted my clothing, though I couldn't tell which injuries were fresh. I was sure I'd die if no one found me. Then, unbelievably, a pair of headlights pierced the gloom. A park ranger's truck. The man inside jumped out, startled, calling to his partner that a hiker was down. They rushed over, loaded me into the truck, and whisked me away. I remember hearing the radio crackle, garbled transmissions. I remember them asking me how long I'd been out here. 5 days, I croaked, hardly able to speak. But the rangers exchanged looks. One said quietly, "Son, you've been missing for almost 3 weeks. They found your truck abandoned weeks ago." That statement rattled me to my core. 3 weeks? Impossible. My mind reeled, but shock kept me from understanding the full weight of it. I drifted in and out of consciousness as they sped me to a hospital. The last thing I recall was the paramedics shining a light in my eyes, calling my name, and me whispering "Bear" over and over. I woke in a hospital bed in Athens, Ohio. My arm was stitched, my ankle in a brace. When I regained enough clarity to speak, the nurses and a detective asked me endless questions. They wanted to know where I'd been, why I was battered and half-starved. They said I'd gone missing without a trace, and there were no clues except my truck and the parking turnout, the campsite, and some scattered footprints. Search parties had combed the forest. I had no good explanation for them, nothing that made sense. When I tried to talk about devils and illusions, they assumed I'd suffered a breakdown or some traumatic event. No one found Bear's body. That fact tore at me. I insisted they look, that I could lead them to the spot, but every search turned up nothing. It was like everything I'd experienced had been swallowed by the forest. They asked me if maybe Bear had run off. The detective suggested wild animals might have taken him if he'd died. I nodded numbly, but deep down, I knew something else had happened. Bear had been claimed by whatever lived in those woods. They kept me in the hospital for a week, monitoring for infection in my wounds, evaluating my mental health. The story I told them was a watered-down version of the truth. I said I got lost and disoriented, survived off creek water, fought off a rabid animal, perhaps. I didn't mention the second tent or the illusions or Jeb. No one would believe me, and I wasn't ready to be locked in a psychiatric ward. Eventually, they released me, telling me to rest and see a counselor. I returned home, feeling haggard and old. My sabbatical was effectively over, but the school principal told me to take more time if I needed it. My small apartment seemed claustrophobic and lonely without Bear's presence. At night, I'd wake up in a sweat, hearing his bark or the echo of that unearthly human scream he made as he died. A month later, an email arrived from a publishing house I'd never contacted. The subject line read, "Regarding your submission." I almost deleted it as spam, but curiosity made me open it. It contained a formal acceptance letter. They wrote that they were thrilled to publish my novel, titled The Devil at Moonville Tunnel, which they praised as a masterpiece of modern horror. They included an attached PDF. My heart pounded as I opened the file. It was a completed manuscript, meticulously edited, riddled with details. Details I recognized from my trip, except I had no memory of writing it. The style was half mine, half something else. I scanned page after page, seeing my name at the top, seeing references to events I'd experienced, and references to events I hadn't. Chunks of the text were in that strange runic script, which the editor had flagged as unique atmospheric sections. My stomach lurched. I never told the publisher it wasn't my real submission. They insisted I'd emailed it to them 3 weeks before I'd been found in the forest. The exact time frame I'd been missing. Some part of me realized in horror that Jeb, Old Red, had made good on a twisted bargain. He'd said, "Maybe we can negotiate the terms." And I had unknowingly. I have no idea if the manuscript is entirely mine. I suspect it's partly his final hook in me. I never officially agreed to let them print it, but they said we had a contract, which I apparently signed electronically. The novel came out a few months later. It became a cult favorite among certain horror enthusiasts, praised for its unnervingly authentic sense of dread. As for me, I can't sleep well. I'm not sure I'm even living in the same reality I started in. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I glimpse Bear. He'll be standing in a reflection behind me or in the periphery of a photograph on my phone. His eyes glow red, or sometimes blue, like the flames that refused to catch properly on our second night out there. The new nightmares I have are full of illusions. The second tent, my own rotting corpse in the trees, Jeb's grin, and Bear's final snarl. When I wake, I feel a presence in the room. I don't trust the passage of time anymore. Hours slip away or drag on for days. Sometimes I'll look outside at noon and see the sky black as night. Other times it'll be 2 a.m. and the sun is shining. My psychiatrist says it's PTSD mixed with a sleep disorder. Maybe that's the case. But in my gut, I know Old Red isn't done with me. Once you bargain with the devil, once you call him, even in the quiet of your mind, there's no going back. I see evidence of that in every flickering shadow, every reflection in my apartment windows. I keep hearing footsteps behind me, especially around 3 a.m. My phone, which I replaced, still occasionally dies without explanation. Sometimes, when it reboots, the lock screen shows a photo of Bear and me in the forest, both of us with red eyes, black tongues lolling. I always delete them. They always come back. It's been a year, and I'm writing this down in hopes someone else will see the warnings. I don't expect to stop him, this presence, this old red, but maybe I can keep someone else from making the same mistake. If you go to Moonville Tunnel, if you venture into Zaleski at night, searching for stories or a piece of your soul, be sure you're ready to lose more than you bargained for. Because once you feel that cold breath on your neck, once you see the tunnel stretch longer than it should, or the forest twist in ways you can't follow, it's already too late. I haven't gone back. I'll never go back. The devil's cunning out in those woods is older than civilization. My story is living proof. Every day I wonder how much of me is left, how much he owns. The illusions may never stop. Sometimes at night my phone rings with an unknown number. I answer, hear static, faint barking, and then a voice that might be mine, or Jeb's or Bear's, whispering nonsense words. I'm afraid someday I'll answer the call and vanish again, maybe for good this time. I know my boundaries are fragile, my mind cracked. The knowledge that I stabbed my own dog to survive has corroded my sense of self. But I also realize that if I hadn't done it, the thing wearing Bear's skin would have dragged me back to that tunnel, to Jeb, and I would have become lost forever. They say you can't cheat the devil, but sometimes you can wound him enough to get away. Or maybe I just wounded myself. Either way, the bruises, burns, and scars are real enough. I can still feel the wet leaves and the static in the air from that night. Whether you believe me or not, heed one warning. Be careful what you ask for in the deep places of the earth. The deals we make in desperation can outlive us, and if you ever wander alone near Moonville Tunnel at night and see a stranger lighting a fire that burns blue, turn around. Go back, because once you step beyond the threshold of that place, you'll never truly come back the same. I'm proof of that. Even now, my reflection isn't quite my own. It lingers a fraction of a second too long when I turn away, lips twitching in a grin that doesn't match my face. And sometimes, if I look closely, I see a pair of canine eyes behind my shoulder, glowing softly, patiently waiting for me to slip into darkness.